Chapter 1041. Brother Chu, if there's a chance, I'll treat you to a drink, a high-level sword of Gojosian said to Chu Mu. With that said, it flew up and left the True Essence Hall. Brother Chu, goodbye. After leaving the True Essence Hall, the 500 or so sword of Gojosian signaled to Chu Mu to leave, either alone or in groups. In the end, only Chu Mu and Bawang were left. As a Class 2 Beast King with extraordinary strength, Bawang was also given the spatial rings of the 3 dead sword of Gojosian and 20 upper-grade True Essence fruits. Chu Mu had already checked. The energy contained within an upper-rank True Yuan fruit was 100 times more than a lower-rank True Yuan fruit. The quality was also 100 times more than a lower-rank True Yuan fruit. Theoretically speaking, a single upper-rank True Yuan fruit contained the same amount of energy as 10,000 lower-rank True Yuan fruit. However, low-grade True Essence fruits were only suitable for low-level Sword of Gojosian, while upper-grade True Essence fruits were suitable for high-level Sword of Gojosian. 10,000 times the value was just an assumption. Generally, no one would exchange for it. Even if they did, it would be more than 10,000 times, maybe 12,000 times or even higher. Unless absolutely necessary, only a fool would be willing to exchange upper-grade True Essence fruits for low-grade True Essence fruit. In any case, the 20 upper-grade True Essence fruits that Bawang had obtained were worth more than 200,000 low-grade True Essence fruit. The only pity was that although Bawang's body was strong, he didn't dare to take upper-grade True Essence fruits to increase his strength. The energy contained in one upper-grade True Essence fruit was enough to make his body explode. For the time being, Bawang couldn't take upper-grade True Essence fruits to increase his strength. Similarly, Chu Mu couldn't take upper-grade True Essence fruits to increase his sword energy, not to mention top-grade True Essence fruits. After calculating his wealth, Xiao Chen found that he had more than 1,300 inferior-grade quintessence fruit. He had plucked some himself, but most of them were from the spatial rings of the Sword of Gojosian that he had killed. In terms of value, 500 high-grade True Essence fruits were worth more than 5 million low-grade True Essence fruits, and 273 top-grade True Essence fruit. The energy contained in one top-grade True Essence fruit was equivalent to 100 high-grade True Essence fruit. In other words, 273 top-grade True Essence fruits were equivalent to at least 27,300 high-grade True Essence fruit. How many low-grade True Essence fruits would that be? There was no need to count. Even if all the inferior-grade quintessence fruits in the entire quintessence secret realm were added together, it would still be far from enough. Chu Mu obviously would not exchange a top-grade True Essence fruit for a low-grade True Essence fruit. He was not stupid enough to do so. For the time being, the 500 high-grade Vital Essence fruits and the 273 supreme-grade Vital Essence fruits could only be stored for now. After he broke through to the 4th heavenly layer of Fate Realm, he would consume the high-grade Vital Essence fruits to increase his sword origin and improve his cultivation. Shortly after, Chu Mu sighed. Although he had obtained a lot of benefits, he could not convert them into true strength. He had to prepare for the future. As for himself, he had paid a huge price. Of the 3 strands of Heaven Wasteland sword intent that the 3rd Palace Master of the Heaven Wasteland Earth Palace left for him, he had already used up 2 of them. There was only 1 strand left. That was the Heaven Wasteland sword intent that could block the full power attack of a low-level sword saint and threaten their life. Even if he felt heartache, he could not do anything about it. In that situation, if he continued to hide his strength, he would only be killed by the Emperor-level sword energy spirit. In any case, he had gained a lot. Aside from True Essence fruits, he had also obtained many top-grade quintessence crystals. Unfortunately, the low-grade Berserk Thunder Sacred Sword was damaged. Focusing his mind, he informed Bawang and flew into the air. Although the True Essence Hall was closed, the True Essence Secret Realm was not. He could still continue to explore and find more True Essence fruits, even if they were low-grade ones. As he flew, Chu Mu suddenly felt that he had missed something. Stopping to think carefully, Bawang also stopped and looked at Chu Mu. What is it? Chu Mu frowned slightly. After a while, Chu Mu suddenly realized that he had missed something. That was, he was still using the divine desolate sword art. The sword energy in his body was still the divine desolate sword energy. I can't feel the consumption of the divine desolate sword energy. Chu Mu was very surprised. The divine desolate sword art was a powerful secret technique. It had two side effects. The first was that the amount of sword energy was greatly reduced and could not be maintained for long. The second was the consumption. Even if he did not use it, it would continue to be consumed. Up until now, Chu Mu had used it many times. He was already very familiar with the feeling of the divine desolate sword energy constantly being consumed. But just now, he did not feel the consumption of sword energy, not even the slightest bit. It was as if he had not used the divine desolate sword art. When flying in the air, he relied more on the power of his spirit sense. The understanding and control of heaven and earth would consume a portion of the sword energy. It was a normal consumption. What's going on? Doubts filled his mind. Did something happen? He was actually in the state of the divine desolate sword art, but his sword energy was not consumed like before. It was as if the cultivation technique he cultivated was not the heavenly desolate sword art, but the divine desolate sword art. That's not right. The divine desolate sword art was not a cultivation technique, but a secret technique. Chu Mu only felt that his mind was in a mess. This situation did not appear in the True Essence Hall. He only noticed it after leaving the True Essence Hall. In other words, the change happened in the True Essence Hall. Chu Mu began to think. He had to clear his thoughts and think clearly. When did this change begin? Although the sword energy was fixed at the divine desolate sword energy, and like the heavenly desolate sword energy, it would not be consumed continuously, allowing his strength to be maintained at this level. This was a very happy thing. But whether there would be any side effects, Chu Mu did not know. The unknown was always worrisome. While thinking, Bawang waited quietly by the side. Suddenly, the clouds above the True Essence secret realm surged and flowed rapidly, as if something was about to happen. It alarmed Chu Mu, who was in deep thought, and he looked up. The white clouds in the sky flowed like a river and countless storms swept over. Following that, Chu Mu and Bawang only felt that their bodies were locked by a tyrannical force. Before they could react, the sky and earth spun and time flowed backward. Everything changed and finally appeared outside the True Essence secret realm. Unknowingly, the True Essence secret realm closed. All the Sword of Gojoseon who were still alive were repelled by the power of the True Essence secret realm and sent out of it. One by one, the Sword of Gojoseon appeared outside the True Essence secret realm. They looked at each other in dismay. Obviously, the change was too fast for them to react. Well, the True Essence secret realm had closed. The next time it opened would be 100 years later. There was no need to stay any longer. The Sword of Gojoseon all moved and prepared to leave. This time, they had more or less gained something. Therefore, they planned to go into seclusion for a while to convert their strength before coming out to adventure. Chu Mu, you're not dead. A strange and surprised voice sounded. It sounded a little familiar. Chu Mu turned around and saw a face that disgusted him. It was one of the team members who had entered the True Essence secret realm with him, Li Quan. You're still alive. How can I die? Chu Mu replied indifferently. Hearing Chu Mu's words, Li Quan's face suddenly changed and anger surged up. Damn you, you think you can challenge me just because you're lucky enough to break through to the second sky of creation realm in the True Essence secret realm? Li Quan roared in exasperation, like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. The surrounding Sword of Gojoseon were instantly alarmed and looked over. A few of them, like Chu Mu, had come out of the True Essence Hall alive. They had seen Chu Mu's strength with their own eyes. It was extremely powerful, and it was not something a 2-star sword of Gojosian should have. Even the Samsung sword of Gojosian could not compare to him. Moreover, Chu Mu had used his trump card to kill the Emperor-level spirit of Sword Chi. Now, there was a Samsung sword of Gojosian shouting at Chu Mu. For a moment, the sword of Gojosian had a strange feeling. It was as if they had seen a ferocious dog baring its teeth at a ferocious tiger. I remember that I saved your life in the true essence mystic realm, although I didn't do it on purpose. A faint smile hung on the corner of Chu Mu's mouth. With a bit of mockery, he looked at Li Quan and said neither slowly nor quickly, I didn't like you from the very beginning. However, in this world, no one can guarantee that everyone will like them. Therefore, I couldn't be bothered to pay attention to you. However, you targeted me time and time again. Even after I saved your life, you were still ungrateful and repaid my kindness with enmity. At that time, I thought that the next time I saw you, I would take back the life I saved you. Nonsense. You're boasting shamelessly. Li Quan was thoroughly enraged. It was as if a scar had been torn open. He flew into a rage out of humiliation and instantly erupted. He drew his sword and became one with the sword. He transformed into a swift and fierce sword light that shot towards Chu Mu. His swift and fierce killing intent locked onto Chu Mu. From the looks of it, he planned to kill Chu Mu in one strike. Li Quan's sudden attack surprised the surrounding sword of Gojosian. They looked at Chu Mu with pity in their eyes. Under the sudden attack of the Samsung sword of Gojosian, could a 2-star sword of Gojosian survive? Although the 2-star sword of Gojosian seemed to be a little unusual. As for the Sword Kings who had fought side by side with Chu Mu in the True Essence Palace, traces of mockery hung on the corners of their mouths. They clearly knew that Chu Mu's strength wasn't something that could be directly reflected by how many stars he had. Facing Li Quan's fierce killing sword, Chu Mu's expression did not change. He did not panic at all. It seemed that he was scared silly because he could not react in time. But the truth? Soon, it was revealed in front of everyone. Chu Mu would not show mercy to an ungrateful guy like Li Quan who sought his own death. In an instant, the low-grade holy sword in Chu Mu's hand was unsheathed. A clanging sound entered everyone's ears. A perfect sword of light streaked across the sky, as if it could cut open heaven and earth. Yes, it was the beginning of the universe. It slashed towards the charging Li Quan. With a poochie sound, Li Quan flew past Chu Mu. Blood splattered and his head flew high. His eyes were filled with shock and disbelief. He could not believe that he, a Samsung sword of Gojosian, was killed by a 2-star sword of Gojosian. Chapter 1043. Li Quan's death was just a small interlude, but it had attracted the attention of many sword of Gojosian. They stared at Chu Mu for a while, leaving a deep impression on him. They didn't want to offend such a genius sword of Gojosian, who didn't seem to have a high cultivation level but was actually very strong. In the Archean world, there were countless swordsmen. There weren't many sword of Gojosian who could challenge someone 1 star higher than them, and even fewer who could kill someone 1 star higher than them. Chu Mu's sharp and perfect sword had left a deep impression in the hearts of the sword of Gojosian. It was like a brand. Chu Mu put away Li Quan's interspatial ring. He realized that the sword of Gojosian that entered the realm of true essence had more than 10,000 sword of Gojosian. Now there weren't even 5,000 sword of Gojosian left. Almost half of them had died. The world of swordsmen was like this. If one wanted to gain something, they had to face the same dangers. If they could survive, they would die. It had been like this since ancient times. Battleships appeared one after another. Chu Mu and the other sword of Gojosian paid 100,000 upper-grade origin crystals and stepped onto the Heavenly Sword Hall's battleship. They left and returned to the West Tiger Sword Shrine. It would take about a month for the battleship to travel from the True Essence Mirror Lake to the West Tiger Sword Shrine. Staying in the room of the battleship, Chu Mu calmed down and prepared to check his body. He wanted to know what had happened to make the Tian Huang sword origin stay in the Divine Baron sword origin state and not consume energy continuously. As for Bawang, he stayed in the room next to Chu Mu's to cultivate. He also had a cultivation method that was passed down from his bloodline. Of course, his cultivation speed would be slower. It was better to consume energy from flesh and blood. In the 3 interspatial rings that Bawang was given, there were more than 1,000 low-grade true essence fruits in total. He was cultivating and eating low-grade true essence fruits at the same time. Although more than 1,000 low-grade true essence fruits weren't enough for him to become a level 3 Beast King, he could accumulate some energy and become stronger among level 2 Beast Kings. Dispelling all distracting thoughts, Zhang Xian focused his mind and sent his consciousness into his body. He sank into his dantian and prepared to check it out. The sword origin was located within the dantian. When the sword origin mutated, the dantian would more or less be affected. It was even possible that some unknown change had occurred in the dantian, causing the sword origin to mutate. Therefore, Chu Mu wanted to check the dantian first. When Chu Mu's consciousness sank into his dantian, it looked the same as before. However, when Chu Mu examined it carefully, he suddenly discovered that there was a small white ball of light at the top of his dantian. It was like a white sun. The ball of light emitted a weak white light that enveloped the sword origin below. The sword essence that was enveloped by the white light was the Divine Wilderness sword essence. So that's how it is. The reason why the Sky Wasteland sword essence is fixed in the state of the Divine Wasteland sword essence is because of this white ball of light. Chu Mu secretly nodded his head. After a question was answered, a new question popped up. This white ball of light, where did it come from? The change in the sword origin was clearly related to the white ball of light. The white ball of light should have been obtained in the True Essence Hall. Chu Mu began to recall. He was certain that the white ball of light was obtained after he entered the True Essence Hall. It could not have appeared out of nowhere. When I entered the front hall when I used the Divine Wilderness sword art, I could feel the continuous consumption of the sword origin. It was the same in the middle hall, when I was in the back hall. Chu Mu, who had his eyes closed, gradually entered a state of recollection. From the moment he stepped into the True Essence Hall, everything seemed to replay itself, as if he was experiencing it all again. Scene after scene, the battle in the front hall, the snatching of the yuan crystals in the middle hall, the joy when he saw the high-grade and top-grade True Essence fruits in the back hall, the excitement when the Emperor-rank sword Chi spirit appeared, the shock and despair when facing the sword domain and the terrifying Emperor-rank sword Chi spirit, countless blood, broken limbs, and finally, he used 2 Sky Wasteland sword intents to block one attack and kill the Emperor-rank sword Chi spirit. Chu Mu finally confirmed that the change in the sword origin did not appear when he was fighting the Emperor-rank sword Chi spirit. It only appeared after he killed the Emperor-rank sword Chi spirit. In other words, the white ball of light appeared after I killed the Emperor-rank sword Chi spirit. After thinking about it a few times, Chu Mu finally confirmed that the white ball of light appeared after he killed the Emperor-rank sword Chi spirit. The biggest possibility was that it was left behind after the Emperor-rank sword Chi spirit died. Without knowing when, it entered Chu Mu's dantian. From a certain point of view, it should be a gain. But whether this gain was good or bad, Chu Mu did not know. With a thought, the consciousness that circled around his dantian approached the white ball of light and directly touched it. If he wanted to know the mystery of the white ball of light, this seemed to be the only way. When Chu Mu's consciousness came into contact with the white ball of light, he felt a boundless, vigorous, and extremely pure yuan qi fluctuation. Immediately after, a change occurred. It was as if his consciousness was the key that awakened and activated the white ball of light. Chu Mu felt a boundless, vigorous, and irresistible power repelling his consciousness and pushing it away. Following that, the white ball of light released an extremely dazzling light, like a scorching sun shining down on the earth. Rays of white light pierced through the space in his dantian, like sharp swords filling the entire dantian world. The tyrannical divine wilderness sword essence formed a lake, facing the white sword-like rays of light, could not resist at all. Chu Mu could only be anxious, unable to interfere. He could only watch helplessly as his dantian was pierced through by the white rays of light. Suddenly, an intense pain came from his dantian, surging through his entire body, causing his body to twitch uncontrollably. That pain was like his dantian was pierced, torn, and destroyed. It was extremely painful, causing his nerves to twitch and even his soul to twitch. Traces of fear emerged in his heart. The dantian was undoubtedly extremely important to a swordsman. It ran through every swordsman's life and was the carrier of sword essence. And sword essence was the foundation of a swordsman's strength. Everything ultimately required sword essence as a carrier. Without sword essence, a swordsman's divine sense, sword intent, and power of laws would still exist, but because of the lack of sword essence, he would not be able to use a complete sword technique. Once the dantian was damaged, a swordsman's path of the sword would come to an end. Now he was extremely worried that his dantian would be damaged or even broken. The intense pain nearly caused Chu Mu to faint, but he used his strong willpower to hold on, not allowing himself to faint. His consciousness had already been expelled from his dantian. Chu Mu was unable to sense the various changes in his dantian. He could only endure the tearing and twitching pain in his dantian, and wait for the changes to end. Chu Mu did not have the slightest idea what would happen in the end. He was somewhat afraid. He was afraid that what he would see in the end would be a broken dantian. He might be able to recover, but it would take a large amount of time and energy. Without a doubt, it would greatly delay his progress, and he might not be able to recover, causing his path of the sword to come to an end. Under the torment of the pain and the fear of his dantian being damaged, every second felt like years. Breath after breath passed, making Chu Mu feel like it was a torture. The pain in his dantian was like a surging tide, and it was also a great test of his willpower. There were several times when Chu Mu was on the verge of losing consciousness, and he had to force himself to stay awake. Amidst the pain, Chu Mu clearly remembered the time. There had never been a time when he was so concerned about the passing of time. After a full 6 hours, half an hour, and 18 breaths of time, the pain in his dantian was finally alleviated. It weakened a little bit, allowing Chu Mu to let out a sigh of relief. After another quarter of an hour, the pain in his dantian had finally completely disappeared. Impatiently, Chu Mu's consciousness once again sank into his dantian. This time, his consciousness was not pushed aside in the slightest, and it easily entered. As soon as he entered, Chu Mu was stunned. Was this still his dantian? His dantian was now vast, like a field. Compared to the size of his dantian before, it had increased by 10 times, a full 10 times. 10 times. What kind of concept was that? When every swordsman first started cultivating, the size of their dantian was basically the same, unless it was a special case, such as having a naturally atrophied dantian, making it smaller than normal, or having a slightly larger dantian. But those were very, very few. As they broke through, the dantian would gradually expand and strengthen, and the ratio would basically be the same. The dantian was where power was stored, and the sword origin was located in the dantian. The size of the dantian was directly related to the amount of sword origin. The dantian of most swordsmen was the same size, so the amount of sword origin was about the same. Of course, the amount of sword origin was also related to the cultivation technique. Some powerful cultivation techniques could allow one to cultivate an even thicker sword origin. But whether it was a natural dantian abnormality or a high-level cultivation technique, there had never been a case where the capacity of the dantian was increased by 10 times. This meant that Chu Mu's sword origin could be increased by 10 times. The first change was that the size of his dantian had increased by 10 times. The second change was that the firmness of his dantian had also increased by 10 times. The third change was that the heavenly desolate sword origin had completely stabilized into the divine desolate sword origin. Chu Mu's first reaction to these 3 changes was to be happy. He was extremely happy and even excited. His dantian had expanded by 10 times, which meant that his sword origin could increase by 10 times. That was to say, the amount of sword origin could reach 10 times that of a sword of Gojosian of the same level. His current cultivation was at the second heavenly layer of creation. According to the normal ratio, the sword origin of a third heavenly layer of creation was several times that of a second heavenly layer of creation. In other words, the quantity of his sword origin had already exceeded the normal third heavenly layer of creation and was infinitely close to the standard of the fourth heavenly layer of creation. Of course, this did not mean that Chu Mu could approach a 4-star sword of Gojosian in terms of the power of sword origin. It was just that the difference in quantity allowed Chu Mu to have more powerful sword technique. But the first and third points allowed the power of Chu Mu's sword origin to reach an abnormal level. The divine desolate sword origin was 10 times more powerful than the heavenly desolate sword origin. Most sword of Gojosian's sword origin were equivalent to the heavenly desolate sword origin, but were far inferior to the divine desolate sword origin. Chapter 1044. The black warship was like an arrow that had been released from a bow as it flew above the West Lake region. It shuttled through countless clouds like a bolt of black lightning. This black warship was the warship of the West Tiger Sword Shrine. It was flying rapidly in the direction of the West Tiger Sword Shrine. Originally, there were quite a number of Sword of Gojosian that had gone to the True Essence Mirror Lake. Now, only more than half of the Sword of Gojosian had returned. Less than half of the Sword of Gojosian had remained in the True Essence Secret Realm forever. Every Sword of Gojosian that had returned alive had more or less gained something. Every one of them had increased their strength, be it in terms of cultivation or sword skills. Therefore, every one of them was meditating in their own rooms, causing the entire warship to be quiet. In the room, Chu Mu had a bitter look on his face. After great joy there was often great sorrow. He was finally sure that the white ball of light in his dantian was his gain after killing the Emperor-level sword Chi spirit. It could be said that it was the most valuable thing in the True Essence Hall. It was far more valuable than the supreme-grade True Essence fruits and the high-grade True Essence fruit. His dantian had been expanded and stabilized by 10 times. This meant that Chu Mu could hold more sword origin and withstand the impact of stronger sword origin. Furthermore, the Sky Desolate Sword origin had completely transformed into Divine Desolate Sword origin, which meant that the quality of the sword origin had increased by 10 times. This was permanent. It was not something that mere True Essence fruits could compare to. Even more than 3,000 supreme-grade True Essence fruits and nearly 20,000 high-grade True Essence fruits could not compare. Under the changes in his dantian, it meant that as long as Chu Mu filled up the sword origin, regardless of the quantity or quality of the sword origin, it could be compared to an ordinary fourth heavenly stage fortune sword of Gojosian. In other words, in the future, there would be no difference between him and an ordinary 4-star sword of Gojosian in terms of cultivation. Coupled with his tyrannical body and powerful earth-quaking energy, if he were to erupt with the imperishable sword intent and the power of laws of the divine realm, it would be easy for him to defeat an ordinary 4-star sword of Gojosian. He could even contend with an ordinary 5-star sword of Gojosian. Even if he only used the heaven-rank sword intent and the power of laws of the divine realm, it was not impossible for him to kill an ordinary 4-star sword of Gojosian. In terms of sword techniques, an ordinary 5-star sword of Gojosian was not his opponent. It was hard to imagine that a 2-star sword of Gojosian strength was strong enough to contend with an ordinary 5-star sword of Gojosian. This was simply a fantasy. At least, it was unheard of in the various territories of the immemorial world. Even in the immemorial battlefield, it was extremely rare. Such an increase in strength was naturally a good thing. To anyone, it was a great thing. Being able to celebrate for 3 days and 3 nights was a great thing. Chu Mu was also very happy, but now, after cultivating for a few days, he was distressed. 10 times the quantity, 10 times the quality, it was 100 times. In other words, if he wanted to accumulate the sword origin in his Dantian to the level of an early second heavenly stage fortune realm cultivator, and the quality of the divine desolate sword origin, he would have to use 100 times the usual energy to refine it. 2 difficult problems appeared. First, 100 times the energy supply. Second, the speed of refining. The efficiency of refining high-grade Yuanjing into heavenly desolate sword origin and refining high-grade Yuanjing into divine desolate sword origin were different. The difference was at least 5 times. Overall, the difficulty of Chu Mu's cultivation had increased by at least 500 times compared to before the transformation of his Dantian. Of course, if his cultivation talent increased, the efficiency of refining would also increase. But no matter what, 100 times the energy supply was a fixed condition. Now that the difficulty of cultivating was 500 times, Chu Mu was extremely distressed. The energy contained in high-grade Yuanjing could no longer satisfy his need. Chu Mu decisively used supreme-grade Yuanjing to cultivate. These supreme-grade Yuanjing were often used by high-grade Sword of Gojosian to cultivate. There was no low-grade Sword of Gojosian who dared to use supreme-grade Yuanjing to cultivate. This was because their bodies could not withstand it, especially their meridians. The energy contained in supreme-grade Yuanjing was much purer and more majestic than high-grade Yuanjing. It was at least 100 times stronger. Under the impact, the burden on the meridians was very obvious. If the meridians could not withstand it, they would shatter. The second problem was the Dantian. The Dantian of a low-grade Sword of Gojosian could not withstand the impact of the supreme-grade Yuanjing's power. Even if Chu Mu's body was strong, he did not dare to absorb the energy of the supreme-grade Yuanjing too quickly. He controlled the speed. His meridians also felt waves of swelling. After the Yuanjing surged into his Dantian, it also filled it. Fortunately, Chu Mu's Dantian was 10 times stronger and could completely withstand it. Every time a swordsman made a breakthrough, their Dantian would expand and become more stable. In this aspect, Chu Mu far surpassed swordsmen of the same level. Even if he used supreme-grade Yuanjing to cultivate, Chu Mu felt that the efficiency was too low. He did not know when he would be able to cultivate the sword origin in his Dantian to the peak of his current cultivation. It was a mixture of sorrow and joy. Chu Mu thought of the Yuanjing fruit. Unfortunately, the power of a high-grade Yuanjing fruit was much stronger than that of a supreme-grade Yuanjing. His meridians could not withstand it. Unless his cultivation reached the 4th layer of Fortune Realm, his body would be even stronger, and his meridians would be even tougher. Only then would he be able to withstand it. Yuanjing liquid, I must find a way to buy Yuanjing liquid, Chu Mu said to himself. Yuanjing liquid was very pure, without any impurities. Moreover, the burden on the meridians after consuming it was much weaker than that of supreme-grade Yuanjing, making it easier to refine. The thought of buying Yuanjing liquid disappeared. Chu Mu once again took out supreme-grade Yuanjing and held it in his hand, continuing to absorb. Although the efficiency of cultivation was very, very low, it was still better than giving up when encountering difficulties. After all, many a little makes a mickle. There would always be a time when the Yuanjing liquid was full. At that time, his strength would be terrifyingly strong. Time flew by day. Soon, a month had passed. The black battleship landed on the West Tiger Sword Shrine. The Sword of Gojosian left their rooms, landed on the battleship, and entered the Heavenly Sword Shrine. After a month of bitter cultivation, Bawang's aura had become much more vigorous and powerful. As for Chu Mu's aura, it did not change much. He had consumed over 1,000 low-grade Yuanjing fruits, but the divine wilderness sword origin in his dantian had increased a little. Compared to a month ago, it had increased by at least 30%. It was only a 30% increase. Compared to the current capacity of his dantian, it was insignificant. Regarding this, Chu Mu could not do anything. Who asked his dantian to undergo such a change? This was the reward for killing the Emperor-rank spirit of Sword Qi. In the past, when the Emperor-rank spirit of Sword Qi appeared, the sword of Gojoseon that entered the True Essence Hall were all wiped out. Naturally, he would not receive any rewards. In fact, Chu Mu still had a question in his heart. When the Emperor-rank spirit of Sword Qi appeared 3 times, the sword of Gojoseon were all wiped out. No one came out alive, so the news was not brought out. However, there were all sorts of strange things in the world. It was not strange for an almighty to find out. However, what about the corpses of the dead sword of Gojoseon? What about their interspatial rings? Thinking about it, the True Essence Hall was mysterious. The corpses of the sword of Gojoseon and their interspatial rings should have all disappeared. Chu Mu did not know what exactly happened, so he did not think too much about it. Striding into the front hall of the West Tiger Sword Shrine, Chu Mu glanced around. He was thinking about how he should purchase the essence liquid. Purchasing the essence liquid was not an easy task. It was basically monopolized. Chu Mu could not find any way. Suddenly, Chu Mu saw someone waving at him. His eyes lit up. It was actually senior brother Qin Tianyi. Chu Mu strode over and gave a sword salute to Qin Tianyi. You don't have to be so polite. Qin Tianyi smiled and gestured for Chu Mu to sit down. He looked deeply at Chu Mu and nodded with a smile. In just over a year, your cultivation has actually broken through from the first layer to the second layer. Your strength must have increased a lot. Senior brother has good eyesight. Chu Mu said. What's your next goal? Qin Tianyi asked casually. His tone was gentle. Firstly, Chu Mu was a disciple of the Flying Heaven Pavilion. Secondly, he recognized Chu Mu's talent, so his attitude was naturally very good. Naturally, it's to improve my cultivation. Chu Mu smiled, and an idea flashed through his mind. Senior brother Qin, I have something I want to ask. Speak. Qin Tianyi said. Senior brother Qin, do you know where I can buy essence liquid? Chu Mu asked bluntly. Essence liquid. Qin Tianyi looked at Chu Mu and did not find it strange. Essence liquid is extremely valuable. It's not that easy to buy. I just came out of the Zhen Yuan secret realm and obtained some top-grade essence crystals. However, the efficiency of using essence liquid to cultivate is faster than using essence crystals. Therefore, I plan to buy some essence liquid to cultivate. Chu Mu said simply. Zhen Yuan's secret realm. Qin Tianyi's eyes flashed with a trace of nostalgia. He had also been to the Zhen Yuan secret realm, so he immediately recovered. It seems that your harvest is not small. How much essence liquid do you want? The more the better, Chu Mu said. With his dantian's current condition, he indeed needed a large amount of essence liquid. The more the better. Qin Tianyi couldn't help but feel astonished. Half a kilogram of yuan liquid required at least 12,000 top-quality yuan crystals to purchase. Yet, half a kilogram of yuan liquid was far from enough for Chu Mu, whose cultivation talent wasn't high. He needed at least 30 to 40 kilograms to reach the second layer peak from the second layer initial stage. If he wanted to reach the third layer, he needed another 30 to 40 kilograms. After breaking through to the third layer, the amount of essence liquid needed would increase again. 100 gene of essence liquid was equivalent to 1,200,000 top-grade essence crystals. Qin Tianyi felt that even if Chu Mu went to the Zhen Yuan's secret realm, with his cultivation and strength, he wouldn't be able to obtain too many benefit. When he heard Chu Mu say that the more the better, his expression became a little strange. Junior brother Chu, the West Tiger Territory's essence liquid is often monopolized. It's not easy to buy it. Qin Tianyi pondered for a moment before saying, however, it's not like there's no way. There are places in the Grand Chaos Territory that sell essence liquid. If you want to buy a large amount, you have to go there. Actually, without waiting for Chu Mu to answer, Qin Tianyi continued, if junior brother wants to cultivate faster, it's better to enter the primordial battlefield. The environment there is more suitable for cultivation. Chapter 1045. The blue sky and white clouds were like a sword piercing through the sun, shooting towards the earth. The red battleship was like a scarlet bolt of lightning that tore through the sky. Even the sunlight was torn apart. It flew forward rapidly, breaking through the sea of clouds, leaving behind a long trail. This red battleship took off from the Western Tiger Territory. Its destination was the Great Chaos Territory. Chu Mu was on this battleship, heading towards the Great Chaos Territory. Bawang did not go with Chu Mu. Previously, when he found out that Chu Mu's Dantian had mutated, he felt that the gap between his strength and Chu Mu's had widened. Thus, he proposed the idea of training by himself. Only then would he be able to quickly grow in this life and death situation. Putting himself in Bawang's shoes, Chu Mu agreed with Bawang's decision to let him go alone. Perhaps the next time they met, Bawang's strength would have become extremely tyrannical, becoming his true left and right arms. Standing in front of the battleship, the chaotic airflow was split by the battleship's impact. The airflow flew from left to right. The sealing power allowed Chu Mu to clearly see the airflow rapidly flowing like a river. From the starting point to the destination, it would take a total of 3 months. Chu Mu did not stay in the battleship's room all the time. Sometimes he would come out for a walk, looking at the thousands of miles of sky, emptying his mind and relaxing his mind. There were a total of over 1,000 swordsmen on this battleship. There was a sword of Gojosian, and almost all of them were sword of Gojosian. There were a few divine condensation realm swordsmen who had extraordinary statuses. They were guarded by 2 or 3 sword of Gojosian. The Great Chaotic Territory was several times larger than the Western Tiger Territory. There were humans and other races in this Great Chaotic Territory. They killed each other, and battles could break out at any time. It was very chaotic, and that was how it got its name. Every person who rode on the battleship had to pay 200,000 high-grade origin crystals as a fee. To Chu Mu, 200,000 high-grade origin crystals was like a drop in the ocean. Retracting his gaze, he turned around and walked back into the cabin. Returning to his room, he closed the door and cleared his mind. Removing all distracting thoughts, he took out a piece of top-grade origin crystal and activated the new Divine Wilderness Sword Manual to cultivate. Originally, the Divine Wilderness Sword Art was a secret technique, while the Heavenly Wilderness Sword Art was a cultivation technique. The change in his Dantian had caused the Heavenly Wilderness Sword Essence to completely transform into the Divine Wilderness Sword Essence. Just using the Heavenly Wilderness Sword Art alone was unable to change it, so Chu Mu integrated the Divine Wilderness Sword Art into the Heavenly Wilderness Sword Art to change it. This process was not difficult for him. Because his perception was extremely high, his mastery of the Sky Desolate Sword Art and the Divine Desolate Sword Art had reached a profound level. After spending some time, he combined the two, using the Sky Desolate Sword Art as the main body, and fusing the profound meaning of the Divine Desolate Sword Art into a new cultivation technique. He named it the Divine Desolate Sword Art, and specialized in cultivating the Divine Desolate Sword Essence. The golden Divine Wilderness Sword Essence flowed in his meridians, constantly absorbing the energy of the top-grade Yuan Jing and transforming it. His meridians emitted a swelling feeling. Even though the difficulty of cultivating now was 500 times more difficult than before, Chu Mu could not give up on cultivating. Otherwise, his cultivation would stop there, and he would not be able to advance even an inch. Cultivating the sword essence, comprehending the laws of sword techniques, cultivating the flying heaven defensive sword art, and cultivating sword technique. He had to allocate a certain amount of time every day. Currently, his cultivation was at the early stage of the second heaven of creation realm. He did not know when he would be able to advance to the middle stage, let alone the third heaven. He had mastered 5 types of laws: void law, metal law, wind law, water law, and lightning law. His sword techniques were the 4 moves: slash iron break wind, slash wind, and wild thunder break. The flying heaven defensive sword art was at the small success stage, and his sword techniques had reached the peak of the 10th level of the sword technique domain and the early stage of the divine realm. Chu Mu always felt that there was not enough time. Just the transformation and mastery of the laws alone required a lot of time. There was also the remastery of the sword techniques, which also required a lot of time. As for the cultivation of the flying heaven defensive sword art and sword techniques, as well as the improvement of his cultivation, Chu Mu wished that one day could become 10 days, or even 100 days. He could not help but sigh inwardly. It would be great if he still had a large amount of high-grade sand of time. Unfortunately, he had used up all of them. Now, his cultivation was at a tortoise-like speed, which made Chu Mu feel very helpless. The red battleship tore through the air and advanced rapidly. Dark clouds covered the sky and the sun. Amidst the rumbling sounds, purple-red lightning bolts shuttled through the clouds like flood dragons. When they appeared, they gave off a horrifying aura. Chu Mu happened to walk out of the cabin and looked up at the sky. The wind and clouds changed color, and the dark clouds pressed down as if the sky was about to collapse. The purple-red thunderbolts and lightning were suffocating. All of a sudden, countless tiny dots appeared and fell from the sky. Each dot was the size of an egg. They were raindrops, and when they hit the seal around the battleship, they created ripples that spread out. Pa pa pa. The sounds were dense and endless like the beating of a drum. Although it didn't land on his body, through the ripples of the seal, Chu Mu could estimate that each raindrop had at least 1,000 kilograms of force when it hit the seal on the warship. Just the thought of it was terrifying. Each raindrop had a force of 1,000 Jin. If it hit a person, not to mention an ordinary person, even a Qi transformation realm swordsman would not be able to escape death. Even a Qi Sea realm swordsman would most likely be injured. When the raindrops fell on the seal of the battleship, tiny ripples appeared. It was endless, making the seal look very interesting. Countless ripples covered the seal above the battleship. It felt as if they were in a world of water. Looking up at the seal, looking at the ripples that faded and disappeared, it was like a world of its own. Unknowingly, Chu Mu was immersed in it. With his hands behind his back, he looked up at the sky. His eyes became deep as he stared at the countless ripples on the seal. It was as if he had turned into a statue. Traces of mysterious qi spread out from Chu Mu's body and circled around him. Not far away, a few Sword of Gojoseon's eyes lit up. They looked at Chu Mu with envy. At this moment, Chu Mu had entered a strange state. This state was called enlightenment. Enlightenment was something that could only be found by chance. Some swordsmen would only have a few moments of enlightenment in their entire life. But some swordsmen would have frequent enlightenment. Every time they had enlightenment, even if their strength did not increase significantly, it would still bring great benefit. Some of these benefits were directly shown, while others were hidden and slowly revealed. In short, enlightenment was very rare. It could not be disturbed. Otherwise, it would be a great enmity. No one was willing to make enemies for no reason, especially when there was no conflict of interest. Therefore, the surrounding Sword of Gojoseon retreated. However, after seeing Chu Mu's appearance, 2 of the Sword of Gojoseon stood guard for Chu Mu. Many swordsmen also looked up at the countless ripples in the sky, hoping that they could also enter the state of enlightenment. However, enlightenment was something that could only be found by chance. Chu Mu's eyes were deep and mysterious. They were calm, like the surface of a lake without ripples. It was as if he had merged with the seal of the battleship. Soon after, layers of ripples rippled out from his eyes and slowly spread out. Those raindrops seemed to have directly landed on his pupils. Traces of enlightenment appeared in Chu Mu's mind. In an instant, everything in front of him seemed to have changed. The dark clouds in the sky seemed to have turned into an army. An army wearing black armor and holding black longswords. They were disciplined and well-trained. They were invincible, ready to attack everything. No one could stop them. With a command, the black longsword was unsheathed and slashed out. Sword after sword transformed into droplets of rain that fell from the sky. In an instant, Chu Mu only felt that he was facing countless attacks. Endless sword techniques were unleashed, wanting to assassinate him. Alone, holding a sharp sword in his hand, he stood in the air. Facing an army of thousands of men and horses, facing countless killing sword techniques, Chu Mu's heart was not only unafraid, but instead surged with a heroic spirit. His heroic spirit soared to the skies as he held the sharp sword in his hand. With a flick of his wrist, the sword hummed as if it was excited. Even if there are thousands of people, I will go. The sword intent soared into the sky. The sharp sword was swung out. It was simple, without any smoke or fire, but it seemed to have cut open the darkness and the sky. Under the sword, many raindrops were shattered, turning into powder. However, the raindrops were endless. Wave after wave, they seemed to be getting fiercer and fiercer. The sword techniques were getting more and more exquisite. Chu Mu held the sword and danced in the sky. He slashed, stabbed, and stabbed. All kinds of sword techniques were used. The pressure he faced was getting stronger and stronger. In the outside world, his body did not move at all. Only the aura around his body was sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes rapid, sometimes gentle, sometimes majestic, sometimes subtle, all kinds of different. Countless raindrops were shattered wave after wave. Countless sword techniques were broken one by one. Chu Mu was like a god of sword technique. None of the sword techniques could get close to him. Unknowingly, his mind flashed through the true energy secret realm. The sword techniques of every sword chi spirit that he had fought and even seen with his own eyes. From the most common level 1 sword chi spirit to the level 2 sword chi spirit, the level 3 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 sword chi spirit, and the level 3 sword chi spirit, the level 3 sword chi spirit, the level 3 sword chi spirit, and the level 3 sword chi spirit, 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 the level 3 sword. Their sword techniques were simple and shallow, to concise and profound. They were unfathomable and advanced layer by layer. That day, when he fought with the sword chi spirits and watched the monarch-level sword chi spirit and emperor-level sword chi spirit, Chu Mu had only absorbed a part of it. Today, the sudden epiphany made him feel like he was facing an army of thousands of men and horses. He absorbed all the sword techniques that he had seen and used them for his own use. His sword techniques that had reached a bottleneck started to improve slightly. It was as if he was fighting against the entire world with his own strength. Facing such immense pressure, his potential was slowly being developed under these layers of terrifying pressure. What a powerful aura! The swordsmen around were surprised by the aura emitted from Chu Mu's body. It was getting stronger and fiercer. He was like an unsheathed divine sword, sharp and unstoppable. The speed of the battleship was extremely fast. Soon, it flew over the dark cloud area. The bright light shone through the seal and fell on Chumu's face. Chumu suddenly woke up. What a pity! If I had more time to comprehend it, my sword techniques would definitely improve again. Chumu thought to himself. Then he smiled. He had gained a lot. His sword techniques had finally improved from the early stage of the God Realm to the middle stage of the God Realm. Chapter 1046. Thank you for protecting me just now. Chumu cupped his hands and smiled. Brother Chu, you're being too polite. If it weren't for Brother Chu, we brothers would have already died in the True Essence Great Hall. Xia Zixiong slowly spoke, and Xia Ziwei repeatedly nodded his head. Because of their relationship as protectors, Chu Mu knew these two people. Xia Zixiong and Xia Ziwei were brothers, and they were twins. They looked very similar, but the color of their robes was different. Xia Zixiong was the elder and wore a fiery red robe, while Xia Ziwei was the younger and wore a light blue robe. Although their appearances were almost the same, their temperaments were completely different. Xia Zixiong was more calm, while Xia Ziwei was more quick-witted. After chatting for a while, they had a preliminary understanding of each other. Xia Zixiong and Xia Ziwei were from the Xia family of Donghua City in the Big Territory of Chaos. They were the first and second young masters of the Xia family. Although they didn't mention their ages, they looked quite young, probably less than 100 years old. Their cultivation was at the third sky of creation. They had passed by the West Tiger Territory to go to the True Essence Secret Territory, and now they were returning to the Xia family of Donghua City in the Big Territory of Chaos. It was fate that brought them together. These two brothers were quite straightforward and weren't very shrewd, so Chu Mu was happy to make friends with them. By the way, Brother Chu, if you don't have anything important to do in the Big Territory of Chaos, why don't you come with us to the Xia family? We'll treat you well, Xia Ziwei said with a smile. My purpose in coming to the Big Territory of Chaos is to buy some liquefied yuan. Chu Mu thought for a moment. The Xia brothers were swordsmen born and raised in the Big Territory of Chaos. They knew more about the Big Territory of Chaos than he did. Instead of trying to figure it out himself, he might as well ask them for advice. It might save him more time. Besides, buying liquefied yuan wasn't a secret. Buying liquefied yuan? Brother Chu, you've asked the right people. Xia Ziwei smiled proudly. Coincidentally, there's a Donghua Tower in Donghua City that sells all kinds of things, including liquefied yuan. Previously, Xia Ziwei had wanted to say that they could just give him whatever he wanted. But after thinking about it, even if they wanted to obtain it, it wouldn't be easy. What could they give him? When we arrive at Donghua City, Ziwei, take Brother Chu to Donghua Tower. I will return to my family first, Xia Zixiong instructed. No problem, brother. Leave it to me. Xia Ziwei patted his chest and said. Then I'll have to trouble Brother Ziwei, said Chu Mu. 3 months later, the battleship landed. Under the guidance of the Xia brothers, Chu Mu headed for Donghua City, which was not far away. Compared to the Western Tiger Great Region, the aura of the Great Chaotic Region was much more heterogeneous. This was because this place was more chaotic and battles frequently occurred, causing the heaven and earth yuan qi to be more chaotic. Walking on the land of the Big Chaos Territory and breathing in the air of the Big Chaos Territory, one would feel a sense of desperation and tension. It was as if one had to be vigilant and ready to fight at any time in this place. Donghua City was like an ancient giant beast lying on the ground of the Big Chaos Territory, sleeping. It exuded an ancient and vigorous aura. As it breathed, it seemed as if a long river of time and space flowed through it. The huge city wall, which was hundreds of meters high, was like a natural moat that separated the inside and outside of the city. Countless seals were set up to protect the city wall and the sky above Donghua City. Flying was forbidden in Donghua City. If one wasn't careful, one could be killed by the countless seals in the sky and die a miserable death. The Xia family had some prestige in Donghua City. Therefore, when entering the city, they didn't need to pay any fees. Xia Zixiong went to the Xia family, while Xia Ziwei took Chu Mu to the so-called Donghua Tower. Along the way, Xia Ziwei also introduced the origin of Donghua Tower to Chu Mu. In short, Donghua Tower was the force that no one dared to provoke in Donghua City. Even if all the clans in Donghua City joined forces, they would not dare to go against Donghua Tower because Donghua Tower had a shocking background. Brother Chu, you must have heard of the real Dragon Dynasty, Xia Ziwei said. A trace of respect flashed across his face. It was respect for the real Dragon Dynasty. Chu Mu nodded. He didn't know before, but after the heavenly creation platform, he knew because Long Zun came from the real Dragon Dynasty and was the crown prince of the dynasty. The real Dragon Dynasty is the top force of the Big Chaos territory. It is also the commander of the human clan in the Big Chaos territory. It is also because of the command of the real Dragon Dynasty that we can live in the Big Chaos territory, Xia Ziwei said. Donghua Tower is a station of the real Dragon Dynasty in Donghua City. At the same time, it sells all kinds of resources. Chu Mu nodded. So, Donghua Tower belonged to the real Dragon Dynasty. No wonder no one in Donghua City dared to provoke it. The first floor of Donghua Tower only sells ordinary things. The second floor sells more precious things, like liquefied origin energy. I have never bought it, but it is said that it is only sold on the fifth floor. Xia Ziwei led Chu Mu to Donghua Tower as he explained the rules of Donghua Tower. It is said that low-level Sword of Gojoseon can go up to the fourth floor, but only mid-level Sword of Gojoseon can go up to the fifth floor. If a low-level Sword of Gojoseon wants to go up, he must fight his way up with his strength. Fight his way up? Chu Mu was slightly stunned. This Donghua Tower was quite interesting. If a low-level Sword of Gojoseon wants to enter the fifth floor, he must at least have the strength of a 4-star Sword of Gojoseon. I think that with Brother Chu's strength, you might be able to enter the fifth floor, Xia Ziwei said. However, with me there is no need to challenge. Although Donghua Tower is backed by the real Dragon Dynasty, in Donghua City, they will more or less give us some face. After chatting for a while, the two of them arrived at the entrance of Donghua Tower. Donghua Tower had a total of 6 floors. It covered a large area, and each floor was dozens of meters high. It stood on the ground and was very eye-catching. There were many people coming and going at the entrance. There were Sword of Gojoseon in the creation realm and swordsmen in the divine condensation realm. Ever since his cultivation broke through to the creation realm, he rarely paid attention to swordsmen below the creation realm. After all, they were not on the same level. Xia Ziwei was the second young master of the Xia clan. As soon as he entered Donghua Tower, someone came to greet him. It was a middle-aged man with a genial face. He was a little fat. "Young Master Xia, what brings you here?" The middle-aged fat man smiled widely. "Shopkeeper Hua, long time no see. You have gained weight again," Xia Ziwei teased. Xia Ziwei teased. It seemed that this middle-aged fatty was quite familiar with him. In fact, as a shopkeeper of Donghua Tower, Xia Ziwei was quite familiar with the more famous people in Donghua City. As a businessman, harmony was the key to making money. If there was no need to, there would not be any conflicts. Although Donghua Tower was backed by the real Dragon Dynasty, in the end, Donghua Tower was a business. Harmony was the most important thing. Naturally, they had to build a good relationship with the forces in Donghua City. "Young Master Xia, you must be joking. This is..." Shopkeeper Hua smiled carelessly and looked at Chu Mu. Anyone who came with Xia Ziwei could not be ordinary. This is Chu Mu's brother Chu. He is not ordinary. He is the first disciple on the creation tablet in the West Tiger territory, Xia Ziwei immediately introduced. The creation tablet in the West Tiger territory is famous. He is the first disciple of the creation tablet. He is a dragon among men. Shopkeeper Hua's exclamation was just right. It gave people a sense of heartfelt admiration and did not seem fake. It made people feel comfortable. I am Hua Zhongxia, and I am the shopkeeper of Donghua Tower. Brother Chu, you can call me Shopkeeper Hua. He was a businessman and had the demeanor of a swordsman. Shopkeeper Hua, although this brother of mine is a 2-star sword of Gojoseon, his strength is more powerful than the average Samsung sword of Gojoseon, Xia Ziwei said again. This time, Brother Chu's purpose is to buy primordial essence. Hearing Xia Ziwei's words, Shopkeeper Hua's face showed a trace of embarrassment. Shopkeeper Hua, what's wrong? Has Donghua Tower sold out of primordial essence? Xia Ziwei felt a little embarrassed and hurriedly asked. It hasn't been sold out. Shopkeeper Hua pondered for a moment and then said, according to the rules, primordial essence is on the 5th floor. Only mid-level or above sword of Gojoseon can enter and buy it. If a low-level sword of Gojoseon wants to go to the 5th floor, he has to accept a challenge. However, it is reasonable to say that we have to give face to you, young Master Xia. It's just that things are different now. There have been some changes recently. What changes? Xia Ziwei's expression was a little ugly. On the way here, he had promised Chu Mu. Now that this kind of accident had happened, how could he be happy? If it were not for the fact that Donghua Tower could not afford to offend him, he would have flipped the table. Due to some reasons, the supply of primordial essence is not as good as before. Therefore, the rule is that only those with enough strength are qualified to buy it. Moreover, the amount of primordial essence purchased each time is also limited. No one can make an exception. Even if clan leader Xia comes in person, I can't break the rules of Donghua Tower, Shopkeeper Hua said awkwardly. At this point, even if Xia Ziwei was unhappy, he could not say anything. In fact, the most important thing was that he felt embarrassed. In that case, I accept the challenge, Chu Mu said unhurriedly. Brother Chu, this challenge is not easy. Xia Ziwei was just about to persuade Chu Mu. Brother Chu, you are a dragon among men. You might be able to pass the challenge. Shopkeeper Hua's eyes suddenly lit up. He said, Brother Chu, Brother Xia, and young Master Xia, please follow me. I will make the arrangements now. Let's go, Brother Xia. If I fail the challenge, I will trouble you again, Chu Mu said. Xia Ziwei had no choice but to agree. He followed Shopkeeper Hua upstairs. One floor after another, the three of them came to the 4th floor. There were not many people on the 4th floor. Excluding Chu Mu and the other two, there were 2 low-level sword of Gojoseon. They looked quite young. The aura fluctuations on their bodies let Chu Mu know that their cultivation was in the 3rd sky of creation realm. When one of them saw Xia Ziwei, his eyes lit up. He slowly stood up and walked toward Xia Ziwei with a faint smile on his face. Xia Ziwei was stunned when he saw the other party. Then, anger flashed in his eyes. Chu Mu noticed the subtle changes in their expressions. He realized that there must be some conflict between Xia Ziwei and this person. Xia Ziwei, I thought you were dead. I didn't expect you to live so long. As soon as the other party said this, Chu Mu confirmed his thoughts. Chapter 1047. Lu Feiyun, you are still alive and well. How can I die? You should die first. Xia Ziwei retorted bluntly, I haven't seen you for a while, but your mouth is still so stinky. Xia, do you want to die? Lu Feiyun was angry, and his killing intent was sharp. Young Master Xia, young Master Lu, if you two have any grudges, please settle it outside, Shopkeeper Hua said decisively. This was Donghua Tower, not a place for conflict. Humph, Xia, I will let you go this time. Lu Feiyun snorted and glanced at Xia Ziwei fiercely. He looked at Chu Mu with a contemptuous smile and said, 2-star sword of Gojoseon, Xia, your taste in making friends has not improved. Instead, it has decreased. I was wrong to treat you as my opponent. As he spoke, he clicked his tongue and sighed. It was as if he regretted taking Xia Ziwei as an opponent. It is not up to you to judge my taste in making friends. Xia Ziwei calmed down and glanced at the other Samsung sword of Gojoseon, but he did not attack like Lu Feiyun. Instead, he looked at Shopkeeper Hua and asked, "Shopkeeper Hua, when will Brother Chu's challenge be held? Please wait for a moment." "I will arrange it now," Shopkeeper Hua said with a smile, cupping his hands and turning to leave. "Challenge? Xia, you are a friend of the two-star sword of Gojoseon. Don't tell me you want to challenge the fifth floor as well?" Lu Feiyun's eyes widened as if he had seen something bizarre. He looked at Chu Mu from head to toe and said, "Tisk tsk, Brother Zhu, this two-star sword of Gojoseon's cultivation is not very good, but his courage is not bad. He is indeed courageous." The three-star sword king, who had been sitting on the chair the entire time and had traces of arrogance between his brows, absent-mindedly spoke. Yet, he only glanced at Chu Mu. His gaze was as if he didn't place Chu Mu in his eyes at all. It didn't feel good to be looked down upon, but Chu Mu didn't seem to hear it and ignored it. In this world, there were many talented people, and there were also many arrogant people. If they encountered any arrogant people who looked down on them, they would be angry and refuted. Wouldn't that add a lot of trouble? Xia Ziwei glanced at Chu Mu and found that Chu Mu was indeed very calm. "So," he asked with a smile, "may I know who this Brother Zhu is?" Brother Zhu is the disciple of the second new king of the Azure Dragon Palace, the number 1 sect in the Great Eastern Dragon region, Lu Feiyun said proudly. In the immemorial world, there were 4 human territories: East Dragon, West Tiger, South Sparrow, and North Marshall. Among them, the East Dragon territory was the strongest. Although it was not as big as the Great Chaos territory, it was only slightly weaker. The West Tiger region had 5 major forces, while the East Dragon region was dominated by one, which was the Azure Dragon Palace. 1 palace, 2 sects, and 3 religions. The Azure Dragon Palace was the palace, the most powerful force in the East Dragon region. The disciples of the Azure Dragon Palace were also divided into rank. The disciples of the Sword of Gojoseon were called King Disciples. The so-called new King Disciples referred to the newly promoted King Disciples. Usually, it referred to the low-level Sword of Gojoseon, which was 1 to 3 stars Sword of Gojoseon. As the number 1 sect in the Great Eastern Dragon region, the Azure Dragon Palace had more disciples than the Flying Heaven Pavilion. The number of king disciples in the palace was at least 10 times or even dozens of times more than the Flying Heaven Pavilion. There were at least a few thousand low-level Sword of Gojoseon. To be able to stand out among the thousands of low-level Sword of Gojoseon and become the second person, not only was he talented, but he also had extraordinary strength and exquisite combat skills. In short, this Zhu guy couldn't be underestimated. Therefore, when Xia Ziwei heard this, he was very surprised. The Great Chaos territory was indeed stronger than the Great Eastern Dragon region, but that was only in terms of overall strength. In terms of individual strength, the Azure Dragon Palace was only weaker than the true Dragon Dynasty in the Great Chaos territory. However, it was not inferior to the other human forces in the Great Chaos territory. It was also not something that the Xia clan and the Lu clan, which could only be considered small clans in the Great Chaos territory, could compare with. "Brother Chu, why don't you come with me to the clan first? Let me take care of the liquefied elemental essence. How about it?" Xia Ziwei transmitted his voice to Chu Mu. "Brother Xia, what do you mean?" Chu Mu also transmitted his voice to him. "Brother Chu, you still don't know the rules of Donghua Tower's challenge. Donghua Tower only arranges one challenge, which is to send a 4-star Sword of Gojoseon. If more than one swordsman challenges, the challengers will first determine the winner, and the winner will challenge the 4-star Sword of Gojoseon sent by Donghua Tower. As long as he can fight against the 4-star Sword of Gojoseon and not lose, he will pass the challenge," Xia Ziwei explained quickly. Chu Mu instantly realized the worry in Xia Ziwei's heart. This Zhu guy was the second disciple of the new king of the Azure Dragon Palace, the #1 sect in the Great Eastern Dragon region. He was very strong, and his cultivation was one level higher than Chu Mu's. Xia Ziwei was worried that Chu Mu would be defeated by the Zhu guy. Based on the current situation, once Chu Mu was defeated, Lu Feiyun would definitely make all kinds of sarcastic remarks. "Don't worry, Brother Xia." Chu Mu smiled slightly. This Zhu guy might be powerful, but Chu Mu didn't think that he could defeat him. The only thing that interested him was the 4-star sword of Gojoseon that Donghua Tower had arranged. "Xia Ziwei, are you worried that your friend will be defeated by Brother Zhu's sword?" Lu Feiyun could tell from Xia Ziwei's expression that something was amiss. He couldn't help but mock him. "I will show mercy," the sword of Gojoseon said calmly. "Since Brother Chu has made a decision, then stay." Xia Ziwei was helpless. At worst, he would lose face with Yi Futian. Chu Mu, on the other hand, was unperturbed. Not long after, shopkeeper Hua appeared and invited the 4 of them to follow him to the challenge area. The challenge area was also on the 4th floor. The 4th floor was very large, and there was even a battle arena. The battle arena was also covered with seals that could withstand the attacks of the mid-tier sword of Gojoseon. "Both of you are challengers. According to the rules of this building, the 2 of you need to have a battle to determine the victor. After that, the victor will challenge this building's 4-star sword king," shopkeeper Hua said with a beaming smile. The sword of Gojoseon Zhu didn't make a move. His figure flashed, and he landed on the battle arena. "2-star sword of Gojoseon, it's your turn," Lu Feiyun said mockingly. Chu Mu ignored him. He jumped and landed on the battle arena, facing the sword of Gojoseon Zhu. "If you admit defeat, my sword will definitely see blood." The sword of Gojoseon Zhu opened his eyes and stared coldly at Chu Mu. His words reeked of blood, and a murderous aura gathered around him. Clearly, this sword of Gojoseon Zhu's strength was pretty good. His combat strength wasn't something an ordinary sword of Gojoseon could compare to. Chu Mu didn't say anything. In an instant, the sword of Gojoseon Zhu moved. He shot out a sword light. It was incomparably sharp, and it cut open the space of the battle arena. It was like a meteor streaking across the sky. It was so bright and dazzling that people couldn't open their eyes. This sword of Gojoseon Zhu integrated with the law of light. It was a sword skill of the sword of Gojoseon Zhu named Aurora. So fast. Xia Ziwei was shocked. Such a sword light made his scalp tingle. That sword was like an aurora flashing by. It was extremely fast. An ordinary Samsung sword of Gojoseon wouldn't be able to resist this sword. But the one facing this sword was Chu Mu, an extraordinary 2-star sword of Gojoseon Zhu. Under everyone's gaze, Chu Mu made the impossible possible. But no one saw how he unsheathed his sword. In an instant, another sword light jumped out from the void. No one noticed it, and their eyes trembled. The speed of this sword light wasn't as fast as the aurora, but it strangely reached its target first. It was as if the aurora was a snake's weak point. It caused the aurora to tremble and dissipate. After shattering the aurora sword, Chu Mu's sword light was even more imposing. It pierced through the air like lightning and fiercer than thunder. The imposing aura spread out, causing Sword King Zhu's expression to greatly change. He hastily retracted his sword and retreated, waving it to block. However, Chu Mu's sword light was all-pervasive and unstoppable. It pierced through layers of defense and pierced the sword of Gojoseon Zhu's chest, where his heart was. The tyrannical power instantly penetrated his inner armor and attacked his heart. He felt as if his heart was being pierced through and was about to be crushed. His face turned pale as he retreated. He groaned as blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. "Brother Zhu." Lu Feiyun's expression changed. Xia Ziwei was dumbfounded. Shopkeeper Hua's eyes flickered as he stared at Chu Mu as if he had discovered a rare treasure. "You!" The sword of Gojosian Zhu held his sword with one hand and covered his chest with the other. He staggered back a few steps as he stared at Chu Mu. It was as if he wanted to eat Chu Mu alive. You are not my opponent. Chu Mu calmly stated a fact. The sword of Gojosian Zhu knew that this was the truth, but he was unwilling to accept it. Waves of pain came from his heart as if it had been pierced through. He knew that his heart must have been injured and needed to be repaired. I will remember you, the sword of Gojosian Zhu said as he staggered down the stage. Lu Feiyun quickly supported him as they left. At this time, Lu Feiyun did not dare to mock Chu Mu anymore. Even the sword of Gojosian Zhu had been defeated in one strike. Lu Feiyun's strength was not as good as the sword of Gojosian Zhu. If he continued to provoke Chu Mu, it would be tantamount to provoking a tiger's whiskers. Brother Chu is indeed worthy of being the #1 fortune disciple in the West Tiger territory. Such strength is really. Shopkeeper Hua cupped his hands and said. The sword of Gojosian Zhu was a Samsung sword of Gojosian. However, even an ordinary Samsung sword of Gojosian Zhu was no match for the Aurora sword of Gojosian. Moreover, that was not the full strength of the sword of Gojosian Zhu. Once he unleashed his full strength, he would be able to contend with a 4-star sword of Gojosian. Of course, Shopkeeper Hua felt that it was impossible for Zhu Yao to tie with a 4-star sword of Gojosian. However, Chu Mu had easily defeated the sword of Gojosian Zhu with one strike. Perhaps if he used his full strength, he might have a chance to pass the challenge of Donghua Tower. It was not impossible for the top geniuses among the sword of Gojosian Zhu Yao to challenge someone who was 1 star higher than them. However, there were not many of them. For example, Chu Mu was only a 2-star sword of Gojosian Zhu Yao. If he could pass the challenge, he would be the top of the top geniuses. Making friends with geniuses had always been the purpose of Donghua Tower. If allowed, Shopkeeper Hua even wanted to exempt Chu Mu from the challenge, regardless of whether he had the strength to contend with the 4-star sword of Gojosian. Unfortunately, although he was the shopkeeper, he was not the real owner of Donghua Tower. He could only do things according to the rules. Chapter 1048. Brother Chu, since the establishment of Donghua Tower, there have not been many low-level sword of Gojosian who have been able to pass the challenge and enter the 5th floor. Shopkeeper Hua explained to Chu Mu, and the low-level sword of Gojosian who can pass the challenge and enter the 5th floor will receive better treatment. Better treatment? Chu Mu was curious. Was there any difference after entering the 5th floor? Of course. The low-level sword of Gojosian who can pass the challenge and enter the 5th floor have extraordinary talent. They are true geniuses, so they will naturally receive better treatment. Shopkeeper Hua spoke of an eternal truth. True geniuses would naturally receive better treatment, no matter where they went. Using the 5th floor as an example, the treatment can be divided into several levels. Shopkeeper Hua saw that Chu Mu was interested, so he explained, when a mid-level sword of Gojosian enters the 5th floor, they will receive treatment from level 1 to level 3. When a high-level sword of Gojosian enters the 5th floor, they will receive treatment from level 4 to level 6. When a Samsung sword of Gojosian fights to a draw with a 4-star sword of Gojosian, they will receive treatment from level 2. If they defeat a 4-star sword of Gojosian, they will receive treatment from level 3, which is the same as a 6-star sword of Gojosian. What is the difference between the treatment levels? Xia Ziwei asked curiously. He knew the rules of Donghua Tower, but he didn't know about the so-called treatment levels after entering the 5th floor. The level of treatment is related to many things. Take the amount of primordial essence that Brother Chu needs to purchase as an example. Shopkeeper Hua smiled proudly and said, "You should know that primordial essence is extracted from top-grade essence crystals and is very precious. Most of it is monopolized and rarely flows to the outside world. Although Donghua Tower sells primordial essence, we can't supply it endlessly. Therefore, we limit the amount that each sword of Gojosian can purchase. The level of treatment is directly related to the quantity of liquefied elemental essence purchased. Donghua Tower has a limited supply of primordial liquid, but there are many sword of Gojosian who need primordial liquid. Therefore, under normal circumstances, every sword of Gojosian will only have 6 opportunities to purchase primordial liquid from Donghua Tower in their lifetime, from level 1 to level 6. This caused Chu Mu to feel astonished. Such a restriction was truly too obvious. First level treatment, you can only purchase 50 kilograms of liquefied essence. Second level treatment, 200 kilograms. Third level treatment, 400 kilograms. Fourth level treatment, 800 kilograms. Fifth level treatment, 1,600 kilograms. Sixth level treatment, 3,200 kilograms. Of course, some sword of Gojosian will be bought multiple times. Shopkeeper Hua only briefly mentioned this. If a Samsung sword of Gojosian defeats a 4-star sword of Gojosian and passes the challenge, he will enjoy the 3rd level treatment and can directly purchase 400 kilograms of primordial liquid. If nothing unexpected happens, 400 kilograms of primordial liquid is enough for a 3rd heavenly layer of creation to break through to the 4th heavenly layer of creation. There will still be a lot left. I see. It seems that this time, Brother Chu's cultivation can break through from the 2nd heavenly layer of creation to the 3rd heavenly layer of creation. Xia Ziwei's eyes lit up. Once he breaks through, Brother Chu can challenge again and purchase primordial liquid. At that time, he will be able to use the power of the primordial liquid to raise his cultivation to the peak of the 3rd heavenly layer. After some comprehension, he will definitely be able to break through to the 4th heavenly layer of creation in a short time. A swordsman's breakthrough required not only cultivation but also realm. However, realms were not a natural barrier for true geniuses. Xia Ziwei believed that Chu Mu was a top genius and would definitely be able to comprehend the art of creation in a short time and raise his realm. Therefore, as long as he obtained enough primordial liquid, he would definitely be able to raise his cultivation rapidly in a few short years, and even reach the 4th heavenly layer of creation would not be a problem. A few years did not sound short at first, but for a sword of Gojosian, a few years was not a long time. Sometimes he would not even be able to break through a small level. Young Master Xia's words are very true. However, if Brother Chu can fight a 4-star sword of Gojosian to a draw with a 2-star sword of Gojosian, then the treatment will naturally be different, Shopkeeper Hua said with a smile. He glanced at Chu Mu and Xia Ziwei and continued, under normal circumstances, a 2-star sword of Gojosian is far inferior to a Samsung sword of Gojosian, much less a 4-star sword of Gojosian. Therefore, if a 2-star sword of Gojosian can fight a 4-star sword of Gojosian to a draw and pass the test, then he will directly jump and enjoy the treatment of the 4th level. If he can defeat a 4-star sword of Gojosian, then he will enjoy the treatment of the 6th level, which is the treatment of a 9-star sword of Gojosian. 6th level treatment. Shopkeeper Hua narrowed his eyes and said, "That's right, the treatment of the 6th level. You can buy 3,200 caddies of Yuanlu. Even if you don't buy it all at once, you can keep it and buy it again when you have enough Yuanlu." At this time, the 4-star sword of Gojosian arranged by Donghua Tower had already arrived at the battle arena. I believe Shopkeeper Hua has already explained the rules of the challenge to you clearly. This 4-star sword of Gojosian was a very ordinary-looking middle-aged man. He was the kind of man who would be difficult to recognize if thrown into a crowd. However, his aura was very vigorous, and his cultivation was very solid. Once the sword is drawn, except for the secret technique, I will use all my strength and will not show any mercy. If you feel that you are no match for me, you can admit defeat. Please. This was Chu Mu's reply. The 4-star sword of Gojoseon's reply to Chu Mu was to draw his sword. An ear-piercing sound rang out, and a flash of sharp sword light appeared. It was strong and hard, as if it could cut through a mountain. The terrifying aura crushed down, and Chu Mu's expression turned serious. The sword strike that came down was not fast at all, but it was vigorous and majestic. It was upright and had the strength to cut through a mountain. It showed that the 4-star sword of Gojoseon's swordsmanship and sword techniques focused on righteousness. As the sword struck out, the air in the entire battle arena froze. It bombarded Chu Mu, as if it wanted to suppress him. Such a sword strike directly triggered the vigorous aura, showing that the 4-star sword of Gojoseon's basic swordsmanship and sword techniques were very solid. Perhaps he was not a genius, but he was a very diligent person. He worked steadily, and one step at a time, he forged his incomparably solid foundation. Facing this sword strike, Chu Mu seemed to see a mountain, falling from the sky. With a thought, the divine wilderness sword essence rushed out of his dantian. The incomparably tyrannical divine wilderness sword essence roared and charged through his meridians, like an endless river. The incomparably tyrannical power instantly filled Chu Mu's entire body. A terrifying aura gushed out from his body, and immediately repelled the air that was crushing his body. Under the collision, there was a loud rumbling sound, as if there were 10,000 horses galloping. The golden divine wilderness sword essence suddenly appeared, and entered the lower-grade saint's sword in his hand, releasing a golden luster that was extremely resplendent. With a light stroke, the power of the earthquake was activated. In the high-frequency vibration, Chu Mu's sword seemed to have cut open the space of the battle arena, leaving behind a faint golden scar that did not dissipate for a long time. The majestic aura created by the 4-star sword of Gojoseon's sword was cut open by Chu Mu's sword. Chu Mu's speed was extremely fast. He ignored the suppression of the majestic aura, and once again struck out with his sword. Immediately, the 4-star sword of Gojoseon's sword was repelled. The terrifying vibration power caused the 4-star sword of Gojoseon's sword to almost fly out of his hand. In terms of the strength of his body, the 4-star sword of Gojoseon was far inferior to Chu Mu. His expression changed greatly and his palm went numb. In that instant, he was unable to exert any strength. Chu Mu's sword once again slashed out. The 4-star sword of Gojoseon immediately used his movement technique to dodge. His movement technique was also so strong and direct. When he advanced and retreated, he was like a well-trained army, advancing and retreating according to the rules, strong and strong. Moreover, when he retreated, he also dispelled the numbness in his palm. Once again, he thrust his sword forward. The momentum was earth-shattering, and rumbling sounds could be heard. Chu Mu saw through all of his opponent's changes. Once again, he lifted his opponent's sword and thrust it forward. It had to be said that the 4-star sword of Gojoseon's strength was indeed stronger than the sword of Gojoseon from before. He was able to contend with Chu Mu for a while. Of course, this was also because Chu Mu did not use his full strength. After 10 moves, Chu Mu's sword landed on the 4-star sword of Gojoseon's back, shattering his protective sword aura. The tyrannical power shattered his robe and penetrated his inner armor, causing the 4-star sword of Gojoseon's expression to change. With a muffled groan, he staggered a few steps back. Before he could turn around, Chu Mu's sword had already landed on his neck. He won. Xia Ziwei and shopkeeper Hua's eyes suddenly widened. They were filled with disbelief, and their jaws dropped to the ground. They originally thought that Chu Mu was able to barely withstand the 4-star sword of Gojoseon's attack. In the end, he was at a slight disadvantage and was able to fight to a draw. This was already very good. In fact, shopkeeper Hua also had the idea that once Chu Mu was able to fight 100 moves with the 4-star sword of Gojoseon without losing, he would stop the fight and directly let Chu Mu pass the challenge. This was understandable. But he never expected that Chu Mu would actually defeat the 4-star sword of Gojosian. Moreover, it was in the 10th move. Although he could see that the 4-star sword of Gojosian did not display his full strength, it was not that he did not want to display his full strength. It was just that after the first move, he was defeated by Chu Mu's counterattack. He could only continuously dodge and block, and could not find a way to counterattack. In simple words, the 4-star sword of Gojosian only took the initiative to attack once. After that, he was completely suppressed by Chu Mu. He was only defeated by Chu Mu after 10 moves. A 2-star sword of Gojosian defeated a 4-star sword of Gojosian in 10 moves. If this was spread out, how unbelievable would it be? Even the Crown Prince Long Zun of the true Dragon Dynasty would not be able to do this. Shopkeeper Hua murmured in a low voice. He was still extremely shocked, and thoughts were surging in his mind. He is too strong. Xia Ziwei's face was full of shock. When he was in the True Essence Great Hall, he saw with his own eyes that Chu Mu had killed the intermediate sword of Gojosian. However, that was when the intermediate sword of Gojosian's cultivation was suppressed. He was stronger than the Samsung sword of Gojosian, but not as strong as before. Now, the 4-star sword of Gojosian of the Donghua Tower was not suppressed at all. His aura was vigorous. Obviously, he had reached the late stage or even the peak of the 4-star sword of Gojosian. He did not underestimate Chu Mu, but he was still defeated by Chu Mu in 10 moves. What did this mean? It meant that Chu Mu's talent was too shocking. It meant that his strength was far beyond his cultivation. The 4-star sword of Gojosian, who was defeated by Chu Mu, was also shocked. It took him a while to recover. He saluted Chu Mu with his sword and turned around to jump off the battle arena. Looking at his back, he seemed a little sad. He had cultivated hard for more than 100 years and had a solid foundation. However, he was defeated by a 2-star sword of Gojosian in 10 moves. It was a big blow. Chapter 1049. Brother Chu, please come with me. Shopkeeper Hua's attitude was even more enthusiastic than before. He couldn't help it. After all, Chu Mu's talent was so incredible. As for Xia Ziwei, he couldn't help it. After all, he was only a Samsung sword of Gojosian and wasn't qualified to step onto the 5th floor. He could only wait for Chu Mu on the 4th floor. In fact, if Chu Mu had asked, Shopkeeper Hua might have given him face and let him know that Xia Ziwei didn't want to buy Luyuan essence. However, since Xia Ziwei didn't ask, Chu Mu wouldn't owe him a favor for such a small matter. Chu Mu and Shopkeeper Hua entered the 5th floor. The difference between the 5th floor and the 4th floor of Donghua Tower was obvious. In terms of decoration, it was very simple, but it gave people a feeling that it was just right. All the decorations on the 5th floor had the effect of bringing life to all the decorations on the 5th floor. They were full of vitality, and the qi of heaven and earth here was very rich. It also exuded a unique fragrance that calmed people's hearts and minds. On the 5th floor, there was a person who was silent. It was as if he had merged with everything on the 5th floor. Lord Jiang, Brother Chu has passed the test, Shopkeeper Hua said respectfully as he bowed to the person. The person turned around. He had a rather ordinary face, but it gave people a very unique feeling. It was as if it was hard to forget after one glance. Chu Mu knew from this person's aura that he was a mid-level sword of Gojosian. As for how many stars the sword of Gojosian was, he couldn't tell. A mid-level sword of Gojosian was indeed qualified to be the lord of the 5th floor of Donghua Tower. When his gaze fell on Chu Mu, he was immediately surprised. He was surprised that Chu Mu was only a 2-star sword of Gojosian, but he had passed the test. Did he really pass the test? Lord Jiang asked as if to confirm. Yes, not only did he pass the test, he even defeated his opponent in 10 moves. Shopkeeper Hua's tone carried a bit of pride, as if the person who defeated the 4-star sword of Gojosian in 10 moves was him. Defeat him in 10 moves. Pavilion Master Jiang's voice became sharp. His eyes were wide open and filled with disbelief. A 2-star sword of Gojoseon defeated a 4-star sword of Gojoseon in 10 moves. Was this a hallucination? Suddenly, Pavilion Master Jiang's expression changed. He seemed to have thought of something and gradually calmed down. Little friend, with the strength of a 2-star sword of Gojoseon, you've defeated a 4-star sword of Gojoseon. You will receive the highest treatment in this building. You can purchase 3,200 caddies of liquefied origin essence. Pavilion Master Jiang immediately said, however, we only have 500 caddies of liquefied origin essence now. The next batch will be delivered in half a year. Little friend, do you want to wait for half a year to buy, or do you want to buy 500 caddies now? In fact, Chumu only had a little more than 1,000 top-grade origin crystals. If he calculated that 50 caddies of liquefied origin essence would cost 1,200,000 top-grade origin crystals, the number of origin crystals he had was not enough to buy 500 caddies. At most, he could buy 900 caddies. However, Chumu was very clear about how much liquefied origin essence he needed to break through to the 3rd heavenly layer of creation. That amount made him feel powerless. In terms of cultivation level, it was not a problem for Chumu at all. As long as he had enough energy, his cultivation could continuously break through to the 9-star sword of Gojoseon. For him, cultivation level did not have any restrictions on him. The biggest restrictions were his cultivation level and cultivation talent. It was too difficult to increase his cultivation talent, and it was also incomparably difficult to increase his cultivation level. Before the transformation of his Dantian, he needed to refine roughly 15 caddies of liquefied origin essence to raise his cultivation level to the peak of the 2nd heavenly layer, and then another 15 caddies to break through to the early 3rd heavenly layer. That was a total of 60 caddies. Now that his Dantian had expanded tenfold, the capacity of his sword essence had also increased tenfold. Furthermore, the Infinite Desolation sword essence had transformed into Divine Desolation sword essence, and its quality had increased tenfold. This meant that the amount of liquefied origin essence Chumu needed had increased by 100-fold. In other words, Chumu now needed 6,000 caddies of liquefied origin essence to break through to the 3rd heavenly layer of creation. This amount was almost equivalent to what the other sword of Gojoseon needed to advance from the 1st heavenly layer of creation to the peak of the 4th heavenly layer of creation. Just as Chumu was about to answer, someone beat him to it. I'll take 500 caddies of liquefied origin essence. A loud and clear voice rang out. Immediately after, a figure appeared on the 5th floor. Chumu and the other 2 took a look. This person was not very fat, but his face was disproportionate to his body. His face was full of fat, and he also had a pair of protruding ears. It was as strange as it could get. The aura of this fat pig face with protruding ears told Chumu that he was another mid-level sword of Gojoseon, and he did not seem to be a 4-star sword of Gojoseon. Indeed, one could not judge a book by its cover. He clasped his hands behind his back, and his small eyes shone brightly. He strode towards Landlord Jiang and said in a loud and clear voice, "I'll take 500 caddies of liquefied origin essence. Sir, you are a 5-star sword of Gojoseon. According to the rules of this floor, you enjoy 2nd-level treatment and can only purchase 200 caddies of liquefied origin essence." Landlord Jiang said unhurriedly, "Besides, everything has a first-come, first-served basis. Young friend Chu needs to purchase first." 2-star sword of Gojoseon? At this time, the protruding sword of Gojoseon finally noticed Chumu. His small eyes fell on Chumu, and he was immediately surprised. "It seems that you have some background. However, no matter who you are, I'll take 500 caddies of liquefied origin essence." This attitude made Landlord Jiang and shopkeeper Hua frown. Chumu's expression did not change. There were all kinds of people in this world. There was nothing strange about it. Chu Mu ignored the protruding sword of Gojoseon, and instead looked at landlord Jiang and asked, "How much is 500 caddies of liquefied origin essence worth? The business of our Donghua Tower has always been very fair. 50 caddies of liquefied origin essence are 1.2 million supreme-grade origin crystals. 500 caddies of liquefied origin essence are naturally 12 million supreme-grade origin crystals," landlord Jiang said with a smile. "Then may I ask if I use upper-grade origin crystals to purchase it?" Chu Mu asked. "Upper-grade origin crystals?" Landlord Jiang muttered to himself. The protruding sword of Gojoseon sneered, and his voice was loud and sharp. "What a joke! If you don't have supreme-grade origin crystals, then get lost. You want to buy liquefied origin essence with mere upper-grade origin crystals? It's not that upper-grade origin crystals are impossible. However, young friend, you should know that in theory, 100 upper-grade origin crystals are equivalent to 1 supreme-grade origin crystal. In reality, however, the exchange ratio between the two is 120 upper-grade origin crystals for 1 supreme-grade origin crystal. If you use it to purchase liquefied origin essence, then this ratio must be raised again. Therefore, the price for 50 caddies of liquefied origin essence is 150 million upper-grade origin crystals," landlord Jiang said to Chu Mu. "I'll use supreme-grade origin crystals to purchase 900 caddies of liquefied origin essence, and I'll use upper-grade origin crystals to purchase 100 caddies," Chu Mu said without hesitation. Instantly, landlord Jiang, shopkeeper Hua, and the protruding sword of Gojoseon were all greatly shocked. A 2-star sword of Gojoseon actually had more than 10 million supreme-grade origin crystals, and more than 100 million upper-grade origin crystals. Such wealth was even richer than many high-level sword of Gojoseon. A trace of greed flashed through the protruding sword of Gojoseon's beady eyes. "All right." Landlord Jiang regained his composure once again. As a landlord, his temperament was clearly not something that an ordinary sword of Gojoseon could compare to. "Wait," the protruding sword of Gojoseon immediately roared. "I've already said that I'll take this 500 caddies of liquefied origin essence. Could it be that you want to forcefully break the rules of Donghua Tower?" Hearing this, landlord Jiang's face immediately darkened. This protruding sword of Gojoseon had repeatedly angered him. "Of course not. How could I have the guts to break the rules of Donghua Tower? On the contrary, I'm following the rules of Donghua Tower." The protruding sword of Gojoseon was not afraid at all. Instead, he said proudly, "Rules? Humph, the rules of Donghua Tower are about first come, first served. Could it be that you want to put the cart before the horse?" Landlord Jiang was even more annoyed. "How dare you say that your actions are following the rules of Donghua Tower? Could it be that you think I'm weak and easy to bully?" A huge pressure of the sword appeared. Landlord Jiang's face was full of anger. His eyes were sharp as he stared at the protruding sword of Gojoseon. He looked as if he would not let him off if he did not give a reasonable explanation. "Wait." In the face of the angry landlord Jiang, the protruding sword of Gojoseon was not so calm. He hurriedly shouted. With a wave of his hand, something appeared in his palm. "Look, what is this?" Landlord Jiang's gaze shifted to the object in the protruding sword of Gojoseon's hand. He frowned, and then his expression changed. The anger on his face receded like the tide. How could you have this?" Landlord Jiang looked very shocked. "Why I have this has nothing to do with you." The protruding sword of Gojoseon smiled proudly. "But as far as I know, anyone who has a true dragon golden badge can enjoy the highest level of treatment in any property of the true dragon dynasty. No one can violate this rule." Landlord Jiang, could it be that you want to violate this rule? The object was completely black. There was a golden dragon carving on it. It was so lifelike that it looked as if it was about to come to life. The entire True Dragon Dynasty only gives out 100 True Dragon Golden Badges. Anyone who has a True Dragon Golden Badge will receive the highest level of treatment in any property of the True Dragon Dynasty. If there is any conflict, the owner of the True Dragon Golden Badge will be in charge. Not only did Landlord Jiang's anger disappear, but it was also replaced by bitterness. Unless you have a badge of a higher level than the True Dragon Golden Badge. He seemed to be talking to himself, but also seemed to be talking to Chu Mu. It was equivalent to giving Chu Mu an explanation. Rules were rules. The Donghua Tower had its own rules, but the True Dragon Dynasty had its own rules. The small rules had to be followed by the big rules because the Donghua Tower belonged to the True Dragon Dynasty. It was one of the many properties of the True Dragon Dynasty in the domain of chaos. Such an unforeseen event caused shopkeeper Hua's expression to change. Finally, he looked apologetically at Chu Mu. If he could make the decision, he wanted to throw this arrogant and protruding ear fatty out. Unfortunately, he couldn't do so, or else the consequences would be severe. Now, take out the 500 kilograms of liquefied yuanfu. The protruding sword of Gojoseon smiled proudly. His small eyes were almost invisible. With a flip of his hand, the True Dragon Golden Badge in his hand disappeared. He put it away. Landlord Jiang had no choice but to turn around and take out the 500 kilograms of liquefied yuanfu. Chapter 1050. Wait! A voice rang out from Chu Mu's mouth. Young friend, do you have any other questions? Lord Jiang stopped and turned to look at Chu Mu. Why don't you go and get the liquefied elemental essence? I'm in a hurry. The Wind-Eared Sword King urged. Pavilion Lord Jiang ignored him. That's right, he had to follow the rules, but that didn't mean that he would allow the other party to order him around. My question is, what's above the True Dragon Golden Token? Chu Mu asked. Let me tell you. Above the True Dragon Golden Token is the True Dragon Crown Prince Token, and above the True Dragon Crown Prince Token is the True Dragon Supreme Emperor Token. Without waiting for Jiang Landlord to speak, the Wind-Eared Sword King spoke first. Looking at Chu Mu, his small eyes were full of disdain. Looks like the faction behind you isn't much. You don't even know this. Chu Mu acted as if he didn't hear him. He wasn't from the Great Chaotic Territory, so it was normal that he didn't know. Brother Chu, the True Dragon Crown Prince Token is the sword token of the Crown Prince of the True Dragon Dynasty. It is said that there are only 9 of them. Chu Mu heard shopkeeper Hua's voice. The True Dragon Supreme Emperor Token is the sword token of the Emperor of the True Dragon Dynasty. It is said that there are only 3 of them. Is the Crown Prince of the True Dragon Dynasty Long Zun? Chu Mu asked again. When the Wind-Eared Sword King heard this, his expression of disdain became even more obvious. He felt that Chu Mu must have popped out from some unknown corner and was extremely unsophisticated. Yes, Crown Prince Long Zun. Lord Jiang and shopkeeper Hua showed respect from the bottom of their hearts. I obtained something in the past. Now, Lord Jiang, please appraise it, Chu Mu said indifferently. He raised his left hand and a golden light shot toward Lord Jiang. Pavilion Master Jiang grabbed at the air and used his sword Origin to grab the golden object. He fixed it in the air above his palm and examined it carefully. Ha 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 ha, it's just a piece of scrap metal. Do you think it's the True Dragon Crown Prince Decree? The sword of Gojoseon laughed out loud with an ear-piercing voice, causing shopkeeper Hua to frown. However, Landlord Jiang and Chu Mu acted as if they didn't hear him. Their loud laughter turned into dry laughter. This. Pavilion Master Jiang's eyes were trembling, and his entire body was trembling. An expression of disbelief appeared on his face, and he looked extremely shocked. The golden object was a small golden sword. There were only 2 words written on it, Crown Prince. The small golden sword exuded a unique aura. Its unique majesty could not be faked. After a while, Jiang Gongzhu finally managed to calm himself down. He wiped away the sweat on his forehead and respectfully returned the small golden sword to Chu Mu. He said, "Sir Chu, 500 kilograms of liquid essence only costs 1,000 top-grade origin crystals. Please wait a moment, I will go get it." "What did you say?" Sword of Gojoseon was shocked and angry. "Are you going to violate the rules of the True Dragon Dynasty?" "I'm doing this to comply with the rules of the True Dragon Dynasty. Open your pitiful little eyes and see what that is." Jiang Gongzhu seemed to be elated. He turned his head and shouted at Sword of Gojoseon. Having a good temperament did not mean that he would be bullied by others. "Is that the true Dragon Crown Prince token?" Sword of Gojoseon's small eyes widened in disbelief. He immediately roared, "Absolutely impossible! My golden true dragon token was personally given to Senior Brother Morong by the second prince of the True Dragon Dynasty. I'm here on Senior Brother Morong's orders to buy the liquid essence. Do you know who Senior Brother Morong is? He's the #1 middle-grade Sword of Gojoseon in our Azure Dragon Palace. He once killed a 7-star Sword of Gojoseon, a peerless genius. Even a peerless genius like Senior Brother Morong could only get a golden true dragon token. How could a mere 2-star Sword of Gojoseon get a true Dragon Crown Prince token? It's definitely fake." Sword of Gojoseon's voice was a bit hysterical. His words revealed his background and why he was so arrogant. So, he was a disciple of the Azure Dragon Palace. So, his backer was the #1 middle-grade king-grade disciple of the Azure Dragon Palace. He was indeed very powerful to be able to kill a 7-star Sword of Gojoseon with the strength of a 6-star Sword of Gojoseon. As a peerless genius, he was indeed qualified to get a golden true dragon token. However, Chu Mu defeated a 4-star Sword of Gojoseon with the strength of a 2-star Sword of Gojoseon in 10 moves. If it was a life-and-death battle, he would have killed his opponent already. Crossing 1-star level and crossing 2-star levels were two different concepts. If crossing 1-star level was qualified to get a golden true dragon token, then crossing 2-star levels to get a true Dragon Crown Prince token, why couldn't it? Of course, there were only 9 true Dragon Crown Prince tokens. In order to get one, in addition to strength, one also had to be lucky. "Sir, Donghua Tower does not welcome you. You can leave now," Lord Jiang said to the Sword of Gojoseon without hesitation, asking him to leave. "You!" The Sword of Gojoseon was furious and was about to be rude. "Get lost." Lord Jiang's eyes widened in anger. His black hair flew and a terrifying aura burst out. The entire Donghua Tower seemed to shake. The extremely powerful sword pressure fell on the Sword of Gojoseon, making his expression change drastically. Lord Jiang was a 6-star Sword of Gojoseon, and he was one of the more powerful ones. The Sword of Gojoseon was just an ordinary 5-star Sword of Gojoseon. His dissatisfaction was shattered. The Sword of Gojoseon's expression changed drastically. He retreated quickly and quickly turned to go downstairs. He knew that if he continued, he would only be humiliating himself. "I will report what happened today to Senior Brother Morong," the Sword of Gojoseon thought to himself as he left. He hated Chu Mu to the core. Lord Jiang's powerful aura was restrained. He smiled and turned to get the Yuanlu. 500 kilograms of Yuanlu were stored in 10 white jade bottles. Each bottle was 50 kilograms. With the true Dragon Crown Prince token, he could get a discount. So, Chu Mu only needed to pay 10 million top-grade Yuanlu. Chu Mu didn't refuse to make the best use of everything. With 10 million top-quality origin crystals gone, more than half of his wealth was gone. However, Chu Mu didn't feel it was a pity at all. He had accumulated these things for his own cultivation in the first place. If he didn't use them, it would just be a waste. 500 kilograms of Yuanlu was still not enough for Chu Mu to break through. However, Donghua Tower didn't have any more Yuanlu. Of course, even if they did, Chu Mu couldn't afford it. He only had a few 100,000 top-grade Yuanlu left. The regret that flashed through Chu Mu's eyes was seen by Lord Jiang. Do you need more Yuanlu? Lord Jiang asked tentatively. To be honest, I do need more Yuanlu. However, Donghua Tower doesn't have any, and I don't have many top-grade Yuanlu left, Chu Mu answered casually. For your situation, I do have a suggestion. It's very suitable for you. Lord Jiang thought for a moment, and his eyes lit up. Please speak. Chu Mu was also somewhat curious. The rising dragon meet of the true dragon dynasty, which is held once every 100 years, is about to begin. Lord Jiang explained excitedly. The rising dragon meet is divided into 3 stages. The first stage is for the low-level sword of Gojoseon. The second stage is for the mid-level sword of Gojoseon. The third stage is for the high-level sword of Gojoseon. The 3 stages will be held at the same time until a champion emerges from each stage. What are the benefits of being the champion? Chu Mu asked. The true dragon dynasty wouldn't hold such a meet for no reason. Of course there are benefits, and they are great benefits, Lord Jiang said with some yearning in his voice. There was a hint of yearning in his voice as he continued. As long as you become the champion of each stage, you will be able to obtain an excellent reward. This time, the reward has already been announced in advance. It is to enter the Longyuan pool to cultivate. Before Chu Mu could ask, Lord Jiang started to explain. The Longyuan Pond is said to be a sacred place for cultivation in the true dragon dynasty. The last time it was opened was 300 years ago. The Longyuan Pond contains pure yuan energy that is tens or even hundreds of times more concentrated than the yuan liquid. It can be quickly absorbed to improve one's cultivation. This is only one of the benefits. The other is that the Longyuan Pond contains a special force called the strength of the dragon. Cultivating in the Longyuan Pond will not only allow you to absorb pure yuan energy, but also the strength of the dragon. The strength of the dragon can't improve one's cultivation, but it can strengthen one's body. You should know that the strength of one's body is very important to a swordsman. Longyuan Pond yuan energy. Strength of the dragon. Chu Mu's eyes lit up. Wasn't this what he needed the most? Not only could he absorb it to improve his cultivation, but he could also strengthen his body. It was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. How do I participate in the Rising Dragon meet? Chu Mu asked. There are 2 ways to participate in the Rising Dragon meet. The first is to go to the True Dragon Dynasty and register yourself. Lord Jiang said slowly. The second way is to go through Donghua Tower. It will be faster, but in this way, Master Chu will temporarily wear the symbol of Donghua Tower and fight as a swordsman of Donghua Tower. If you win, you will also enter the Longyuan Pond. Donghua Tower will also be rewarded by the dynasty. But everything depends on Master Chu's decision, Lord Jiang said. To be honest, he hoped that Chu Mu could participate in the Rising Dragon meet as a swordsman of Donghua Tower. But Chu Mu's talent and status made it difficult for him to ask. In that case, Lord Jiang, please register for me, Chu Mu said after thinking for a while. Chu Mu felt that Lord Jiang was not bad. Moreover, it would be more troublesome for him to register himself. There was no harm in participating as a swordsman of Donghua Tower. Really? Lord Jiang was overjoyed. Really? Chu Mu nodded. Good. No matter what happens in the end, I will repay you for your kindness today, Lord Jiang said excitedly. Pavilion Master Jiang said excitedly. Soon after, he said to Shopkeeper Hua, Shopkeeper Hua, bring young Master Chu to rest first. After I register, I will bring young Master Chu out. Master Chu, please follow me. Shopkeeper Hua was now much more respectful to Chu Mu. There was no other way. Chu Mu had taken out the true Dragon Crown Prince token. No matter how he obtained it, it showed that he was extraordinary. Coupled with the fact that a 2-star sword of Gojoseon defeated a 4-star sword of Gojoseon, it was even more indescribable. Moreover, Chu Mu had agreed to participate in the Rising Dragon meet as a swordsman of Donghua Tower. With his strength, he might be able to win the championship. When the time came, he would also get a share of the rewards from Donghua Tower. Chapter 1051. A 10-meter-long green flying ship in the shape of a bamboo leaf rose into the sky outside Donghua City. It soared into the sky, riding the wind and breaking the waves. The green power of wind surrounded it as if it was carrying the flying ship. It tore through the sky and flew away quickly. This green flying ship was the Donghua flying ship of Donghua Tower. It was not equipped with any martial arts, but it was extremely fast and suitable for traveling. There were only 3 people on the green Donghua flying ship. They were Lord Jiang of Donghua Tower, a mid-level sword of Gojoseon, and Chu Mu. The 5th floor of Donghua Tower was managed by Lord Jiang. He was a mid-level sword of Gojoseon. The 6th floor, which was the highest, was managed by a high-level sword of Gojoseon. Most of the time, the high-level sword of Gojoseon was cultivating. Therefore, many things in Donghua Tower were managed by Lord Jiang, unless there was something he could not decide on. Lord Jiang's purpose this time was to take Chu Mu and his companion to the true Dragon Dynasty. Besides Chu Mu, the other mid-level sword of Gojoseon was a 6-star sword of Gojoseon. His name was Xieronghua. He was also the sword of Gojoseon who was participating in the Rising Dragon League as a swordsman of Donghua Tower. Lord Jiang did not say why Xieronghua would participate in the Rising Dragon League as a swordsman of Donghua Tower, and Chu Mu was not interested in asking. As for Xieronghua, he did not pay any attention to Chu Mu. He did not even say a word. His eyes showed that he did not care about Chu Mu at all. As a result, they were able to coexist peacefully. The 10-meter-long flying ship was the smallest among all the flying ships, but it was more than enough to accommodate 3 people. Along the way, besides controlling the flying ship, Lord Jiang also chatted with Chu Mu and his companion. He was indeed a good person and did not neglect anyone. It would take a month to travel from Donghua Tower to the true Dragon Dynasty on this flying ship. The Rising Dragon League would start in half a month, and the registration period would end within a month. Chu Mu also felt lucky that he agreed to participate as a swordsman of Donghua Tower. Otherwise, it would be unknown whether he could make it to the true Dragon Dynasty in a month. Sitting on the Donghua flying ship, Chu Mu was not in a hurry. Sometimes he would chat with Landlord Jiang, and sometimes he would meditate on his swordsmanship. The days passed quickly. A month had passed. Chu Mu, who was sitting on Donghua's flying ship, could see a group of palaces in front of him. They were resplendent and majestic, covering an area of tens of thousands of miles. There seemed to be a golden aura rising above the palaces. It looked like a dragon circling around, protecting the true Dragon Dynasty. The majestic power of the true Dragon Dynasty stunned Chu Mu for a moment. Xieronghua glanced at Chu Mu with a hint of mockery in his eyes. The Donghua flying ship could not fly directly above the true Dragon Dynasty and land outside the true Dragon Dynasty. As a subsidiary property of the true Dragon Dynasty, the flying ship naturally had a special place to stay. In addition to the Donghua flying ship, there were other flying ships of different colors, symbols, and shape. They came from various properties of the true Dragon Dynasty. Walking down from the flying ship, Chu Mu and Xieronghua went to the resting place under the guidance of Landlord Jiang. At this point, the registration for the Rising Dragon League had ended. The remaining half a month was for the Sword of Gojoseon, who had signed up to rest and adjust themselves to their best condition before the competition. Every Sword of Gojoseon had a resting place. It was very luxurious and there were all kinds of exquisite snacks and precious fruit. It showed how amazing the talent and foundation of the true Dragon Dynasty was. These snacks and fruits could not be eaten outside. In addition, there were formations set up in the resting place that could absorb yuan qi, making the yuan qi in the resting place richer and more abundant. It was beneficial for cultivation. There was also a concentrating spirit incense. The fragrance was not easy to detect, but it had the effect of calming one's mind. If such a concentrating spirit incense was sold outside, it could be sold for thousands of top-grade yuan crystals. It was very valuable. One concentrating spirit incense could only burn for a day. After 15 days, it would be more than 10,000 top-grade yuan crystals. The true Dragon Dynasty had spent a lot for the Rising Dragon League. It should be known that the number of Sword of Gojoseon who had signed up to participate was more than 1,000. For half a month, Chu Mu stayed in the resting place to cultivate. According to his usual cultivation allocation, he cultivated the Divine Wilderness Sword Essence, the Flying Heaven Sword Controlling Technique, Sword Arts, comprehending the power of laws, sword skills, and so on. Now that there was yuan liquid, Chu Mu used it to cultivate. Previously, Chu Mu had obtained 5 kilograms of yuan liquid. At that time, he could only consume 1 kilogram at a time. After refining it, he needed a period of time before he could consume it again. Now, Chu Mu's cultivation base had increased. Adding to the fact that he had refined the 9 revolution body refining fruit, his body was more than 10 times stronger than before. His meridians and other meridians were also strengthened by at least 10 times. Moreover, his dantian had undergone a transformation, causing it to expand 10 times and become 10 times stronger. The changes were unimaginable. Therefore, Chu Mu could consume 5 kilograms of yuan liquid at a time. After refining it, he only needed a day to refine it again. In this way, Chu Mu could refine 70 to 80 kilograms of yuan liquid in half a month, causing his sword essence to become denser. Of course, this kind of improvement was too slow. Chu Mu had no other choice. He also hoped that it would be faster, but the reality was as such. He could only cultivate slowly and hope that Long Yuan Qi would not disappoint him. Half a month's time was actually very short. Sometimes it would pass just by a little bit of seclusion, as if it was just a breath of time. But sometimes many things could be done in half a month. When the Sword of Gojoseon who wanted to participate in the Rising Dragon League had all arrived, all kinds of information began to circulate. There were people who specially dug up information and organized it into information. As a matter of fact, Jiang Landlord gave Chu Mu a book of information that had been carefully organized. The title of this book was very straightforward. It was called Champion Candidate. As the name implied, it was the candidate who had the potential to become the champion of this Rising Dragon League. Outside of cultivating, Chu Mu was also interested. He picked it up and flipped through it. Jiang Landlord sat to the side, eating exquisite snacks. This book was divided into 3 sections, corresponding to the 3 major stages of the Sword of Gojoseon. The first section recorded the low-level Sword of Gojoseon. Flipping to the first page, a name jumped into his eyes. Long Zun. Under Long Zun was a related introduction. The True Dragon Dynasty's 3rd prince, because of his outstanding True Dragon bloodline, powerful soul, and cultivation talent, the True Dragon Emperor had designated him as the True Dragon Dynasty's Crown Prince, the only Crown Prince. 55 years old this year, early 3rd Heavenly Stage Fortune Realm cultivation. He had inherited the True Dragon Sword Dao, and his sword intent was at low-level divine rank. He had grasped the Power Law, Fire Law, Yang Law, and Lightning Law, all of which had reached low-level divine rank. He had grasped 3 Earth-rank first-grade heaven-shaking Sword of Gojoseon sword skills, and 2 Earth-rank second-grade heaven-shaking sword skills. He was judged to be the most likely candidate to become the champion of the low-level Sword of Gojoseon Rising Dragon League. There were even people who believed that the champion of the low-level Sword of Gojoseon Rising Dragon League would be none other than the Long Zun Crown Prince. Early 3rd Heavenly Stage Fortune Realm grasped 4 kinds of laws and 5 sword skills. Chu Mu was greatly astonished. The Long Zun Crown Prince was the person who had competed with him for the number 1 Fortune Disciple position. His sword intent and profoundness had both reached the early 9th Revolution realm. Chu Mu wasn't sure how high his cultivation talent was, but he guessed that it wouldn't be lower than second grade. His comprehension was also not to be underestimated. It wasn't strange that he could reach the third heavenly stage fortune realm. After all, he was talented and had the true dragon dynasty as his backer. Even if he broke through to the fourth heavenly stage fortune realm, Chu Mu wouldn't be surprised. What surprised Chu Mu was the number of laws and sword skills that Long Zun had grasped. In terms of comprehension, Chu Mu was confident that he was better than Long Zun, but he had only managed to transform 5 kinds of laws and grasp 4 or 5 sword skills after using the high-grade Sand of Time. In other words, other than the bloodline, the true Dragon Dynasty's foundation was also not to be underestimated. With such strength, it wasn't impossible to claim that he was the champion of the Rising Dragon League's low-level sword of Gojoseon. Flipping to the second page, another name jumped into view. Lan Haichao, the Starry Sky Sword Sect's #1 low-level monarch-ranked disciple, 64 years old this year. It was said that he had already grasped the essence of the Starry Sky Sword Dao, and his sword intent had transformed into an elemental sword intent. Starry Sky Sword Intent. Lan Haichao's cultivation was at the peak of the third heavenly stage fortune realm. His sword intent had reached the peak of the heaven class, and he had grasped the laws of wind, speed, lightning, water, and stars. All of them had reached the peak of the heaven class. He had also grasped 3 Earth-class first-grade Earth-class sword skills and 2 Earth-class second-grade Earth-class sword skills. It was said that he had also grasped 1 Earth-class third-grade Earth-class sword skill. Lan Haichao's information entered Chu Mu's eyes, and he remembered it clearly. Lan Haichao was indeed powerful, and was a worthy opponent. The Starry Sky Sword Sect was second only to the true Dragon Dynasty among the human race in the Chaotic Territory. Although it wasn't as strong as the true Dragon Dynasty, the difference wasn't that great. As the #1 low-level King Realm disciple, Lan Haichao wasn't to be underestimated. It should be known that the sword skills grasped by a peerless genius were different from those grasped by ordinary swordsmen. For example, the Samsung Sword of Gojoseon that Chu Mu had encountered in the past could even display a third-grade Sword of Gojoseon. However, the sword skills weren't perfect enough and the power wasn't strong enough. It couldn't be compared with the sword skills of a peerless genius. On the contrary, a peerless genius either didn't grasp any sword skills. If they did, it must be perfect and powerful. Otherwise, they might as well not have it. Flipping to the third page, the third name jumped into view. Murong Xiao, the #1 disciple of the new King Realm disciple of the Azure Dragon Palace in the Eastern Dragon Territory. 65 years old. Cultivation at the peak of the third sky of Creation Realm. He inherited the Azure Dragon Sword Principle. It was said that he had already comprehended the sword principle to a profound level, causing his sword intent to transform into the Azure Dragon Sword Intent. It was at the top of the heaven level, and its power was even stronger. He had grasped the laws of wind, the laws of wood, the laws of water, the laws of Een, and the laws of beast. He had also grasped 3 first-grade Earthbreaker sword skills and 2 second-grade Earthbreaker sword skills. It was said that he had also grasped 1 third-grade Earthbreaker sword skill. The rules of Yin and Yang were opposite rules. They were relatively rare rules. The rules of Beast was also a rare rule. Naturally, its power was stronger than ordinary rules. Flipping to the fourth page, the fourth name jumped into view. Chapter 1052. Crown Prince Longzuan, Lan Haichao, Murong Xiao, Li Xiaoxiao, and Wang Yu. These 5 were all at the third heavenly layer of Creation Realm. Longzuan was at the early stage, while the other 4 were a few years older than Longzuan. They were all at the peak of the third heavenly layer of Creation Realm. The 5 of them were considered the most likely candidates to win the championship. As for the intermediate Sword of Gojoseon and advanced Sword of Gojoseon, Chu Mu only skimmed through them. After all, he would not fight with them. Their information is still not comprehensive enough. Jiang Landlord smiled. Although young Master Chu's cultivation is only at the early stage of the second heavenly layer of creation realm, you were able to defeat a 4-star Sword of Gojosian in 10 moves. Many Samsung Sword of Gojosian geniuses can't do that. It's not unreasonable for the 5 of them to be considered the most likely candidates to win the championship, Chu Mu said with a smile. Indeed, from the information, it could be seen that the 5 of them were not to be underestimated. They were powerful, and they must have mastered a secret technique to increase their strength. Once they used it, they would be even more powerful. In the end, information was just information. Every peerless genius had their own trump cards. They wouldn't use them easily, and they wouldn't let others know about them. Even so, Chu Mu was confident that he could compete with them, and even defeat them all. Besides Chu Mu himself, no one else knew about his situation. His cultivation was at the second heavenly layer of creation realm, but the quantity and quality of his sword energy was comparable to that of a 4th heavenly layer of creation realm. In terms of cultivation strength, Chu Mu was not inferior to Crown Prince Longzuan and the others. On the contrary, he might even surpass them. Of course, Crown Prince Longzuan and the others cultivated extraordinary technique. The quantity and quality of their sword energy would definitely be higher than that of an ordinary Samsung Sword of Gojosian. However, Chu Mu believed that the 5 champions were not complete. Perhaps some of them had hidden their strength and were waiting for the final moment to explode. They would appear as dark horses and aim for the championship. Before leaving, Jiang Landlord also told Chu Mu not to feel too much pressure. He just had to fight with all his heart. Whether or not he could become the champion would be up to fate. In fact, although Jiang Landlord thought highly of Chu Mu, he didn't think that Chu Mu would be able to win the championship. After all, there were many powerful low-grade Sword of Gojosian, and each of them could fight across star ranks. As for Chu Mu, he was only a 2-star Sword of Gojosian, and his level was lower than theirs. Chu Mu smiled and didn't answer. He didn't need to answer because when the time came, Pavilion Master Jiang and the others would know who the champion was. After Lord Jiang left, Chu Mu flipped through the information once more. The corners of his mouth curled up into a smile as he thought to himself, "This championship is mine for sure. Everything that stands in my way will be crushed under my sword." Putting down the information, Chu Mu began to cultivate again. The name of the champion gradually spread out and became the topic of discussion. In the blink of an eye, half a month passed. The Rising Dragon pageant had officially begun. All the participating Sword of Gojosian left their resting rooms and arrived at the venue. This was an open-air palace. There were countless seats all around, enough to seat hundreds of thousands of spectators. In the center, there was a huge platform that could hold tens of thousands of people. All the Sword Kings participating in the Rising Dragon Grand Assembly were gathered here. According to the 3 stages, they were divided into low-grade Sword of Gojosian, mid-grade Sword of Gojosian, and high-level Sword of Gojosian. Chu Mu swept his gaze over the crowd. The low-grade Sword of Gojosian had the most people, close to 2,000. The mid-grade Sword of Gojosian had the second most people, close to 1,300. The high-level Sword of Gojosian had the least, less than 600. Close to 4,000 Sword of Gojosian had gathered here. Even if they did not do it deliberately, their bodies still emitted traces of sharpness that converged into one and filled the huge platform, shocking everyone. Is that Crown Prince Longzun? He is indeed a dragon among men. I see him. He has an imposing appearance and an extraordinary aura. As expected of the most talented crown prince in the history of the true dragon dynasty. I'm sure that the champion of the low-grade Sword of Gojosian will definitely be Crown Prince Longzun. I don't think so. Crown Prince Longzun is indeed very powerful, but his cultivation base is not as good as the other 4. Moreover, his grasp of the sword Dao is not as profound as the other 4. He has not reached the stage of transforming his sword intent, so it's hard to say who will be the champion. In any case, I think that the champion of the low-grade sword of Gojosian will definitely be one of the 5. That's not necessarily true. What if a dark horse appears? Dark horse? Are you talking about the 2 sword of Gojosian whose cultivation base is only at the 2nd heavenly layer of creation? In an instant, the spearhead was pointed at Chu Mu. However, among the nearly 2,000 low-grade sword of Gojosian, the most eye-catching ones were undoubtedly the 5 champions, as well as Chu Mu and another person. This was because other than Chu Mu and a very young-looking sword of Gojosian, the other sword of Gojosian's cultivation base were all at the 3rd heavenly layer of creation. Even the weakest was at the initial 3rd heavenly layer. Only Chu Mu and the young-looking sword of Gojosian's cultivation base were at the 2nd heavenly layer of creation. However, Chu Mu's cultivation base was at the initial 2nd heavenly layer of creation, while the young-looking sword of Gojosian's cultivation base was at the advanced 2nd heavenly layer of creation. Regardless of whether they were at the initial or advanced 2nd heavenly layer of creation, they could not be compared with those at the 3rd heavenly layer of creation. Therefore, Chu Mu and the sword of Gojosian, who seemed to be less than 20 years old, became the focus of discussion. The mid-grade sword of Gojosian's group consisted entirely of 6-star sword of Gojosian. However, the high-grade sword of Gojosian's group was different. Most of them were 8-star sword of Gojosian, with a few 9-star sword of Gojosian. At this moment, countless rays of light shot up into the sky in the distance, emitting sharp whistling sounds. Balls of light shot up into the sky like fireworks. They soared into the sky and exploded 1,000 meters in the air. They scattered and were extremely dazzling, attracting the attention of countless people. In the sky above the true dragon dynasty, countless dazzling rays of light were like a gathering of stars. Vaguely, the rays of light formed a huge light dragon that soared in the sky and let out earth-shattering roars. When that roar died down, 9 more vigorous and powerful chants rang out in succession, resounding through the sky. The chants carried an astonishing might and a terrifying pressure that covered the sky and covered the earth. It swept past everyone, causing their bodies to tremble. Then, a group of huge figures appeared in the distance. Everyone squinted their eyes and saw 9 ferocious-looking flood dragons. Each flood dragon was more than 100 meters long. They were dark green all over, with barbs growing out of their heads. They looked extremely ferocious and tough. The aura emitted by each flood dragon was so strong that it made the swordsmen present shudder. It was as if they could sweep away and crush everything. Just one of the 9 flood dragons was enough to sweep away nearly 2,000 sword of Gojosian on the platform. Imperial beasts. These flood dragons are imperial beasts. The voice was trembling. I've heard that there are flood dragons in the true dragon dynasty. So it's true. And there are 9 of them. Judging by their power, ordinary Nirvana realm swordsmen are no match for them. Primordial ferocious beasts were also divided into different levels. King beasts were for sword of Gojosian, Emperor beasts were for Nirvana realm swordsmen, and Saint beasts were for sword saint. Flood dragons were of a higher level among primordial ferocious beasts. They had extraordinary bloodlines and strong combat abilities. They were like the top geniuses of the human race. Flood dragons could definitely sweep away most primordial ferocious beasts of the same level. Ordinary Nirvana realm swordsmen were no match for the 9 flood dragons at all. The appearance of the 9 flood dragons was shocking, but what was even more shocking was the chariot behind them. It was a huge and gorgeous chariot. There were 9 lifelike dragon carvings on the chariot, as if they were flying in the sky. The 4 wheels of the chariot were rolling in the void, burning with golden flames. It was like a chariot of the sun, streaking across the sky, leaving a golden trail. The person sitting in the chariot immediately became the center of the world, the focus of countless people's eyes. He wore a crown with 9 dragons on his head and a robe with 9 dragons on his body. His pale golden face was extremely majestic. When he opened and closed his eyes, sharp light pierced through the void. His aura was like that of a monarch. It's the emperor of the true dragon dynasty. Under the gaze of countless people, the 9 flood dragons pulled the chariot to the edge of the platform. "Greetings, your majesty." Some swordsmen bowed 90 degrees to the emperor in the sky. The true dragon dynasty didn't have a rule about kneeling. When meeting the emperor, they only needed to bow 90 degrees to show respect. This bow was the bow of a subject to the emperor. Soon after, the other swordsmen all followed suit, including Chu Mu, because this bow was the bow of a younger generation to an elder, the bow of a weak person to a strong person. The true dragon emperor wasn't just the emperor of the true dragon dynasty. He himself was a powerful saint, even though he was only at the first heavenly layer of the Ionic era. Every sword saint was the main force of the human race. They were the protectors of the human race, not to mention a sword saint like the true dragon emperor who had the bloodline of a true dragon. He was much stronger than ordinary sword saints of the same level. "Everyone, please rise." A majestic voice resounded. The Rising Dragon pageant is held once every 100 years in the true dragon dynasty. The winners of the 3 groups can all enter the Dragon Yuan Pond to cultivate. Whether they're swordsmen of the true dragon dynasty or not, they're all part of the human race. I've always hoped that the human race would prosper and produce geniuses. I'm sure all the geniuses have been waiting for the pageant to begin for a long time. I won't say much. The true dragon emperor smiled faintly. I declare that the Rising Dragon pageant of the true dragon dynasty begins now. As soon as the true dragon emperor finished speaking, the platform in the middle suddenly changed. With a rumble, the 3 groups of Sword of Gojoseon soared into the sky, looking at the changes below in surprise. The huge platform slowly sank. Lights of various colors flashed. The ground shook and rumbled. It was as if the world had changed. The 3 platforms slowly floated up from below, protruding out of the ground. The 3 platforms were of the same size and were arranged in a triangular formation. Each platform protruded 10 meters from the ground and covered an area of tens of thousands of square meters. Colorful lights shrouded the high platforms, forming an inverted semicircle that emitted a shocking aura fluctuation like a surging tide. Chapter 1053. The 3 platforms were covered in colorful lights, and the auras emanating from them varied in strength. With a whoosh, 3 figures appeared in the air, standing on top of the 3 platforms, looking down at the participants of the Sword of Gojoseon. "Ladies and gentlemen, these 3 platforms will be the Rising Dragon platforms where you will fight," one of the old men said loudly. "Only by ascending the Rising Dragon platforms will you be able to prove that you are qualified to fight on them." Judging from the old man's words, it seemed that the 3 Rising Dragon platforms had their own secrets. "Remember, you only have an incense stick's worth of time, and you are not allowed to use any sword skills," the old man said as a red incense stick appeared in his hand. He lit it up and stuck it in the air, causing white smoke to rise. The Sword of Gojoseon began to move. The Rising Dragon platform with the weakest aura corresponded to the low-tier Sword of Gojoseon group, the stronger one corresponded to the mid-tier Sword of Gojoseon group, and the strongest one corresponded to the high-tier Sword of Gojoseon group. Their figures shot through the air toward the corresponding Rising Dragon platform. The leading Sword of Gojoseon was immediately blocked by the colorful lights and bounced back. Slash! He reacted instantly and drew his sword light. The sharp sword light turned into a crescent moon and slashed out, tearing the colorful lights apart. He then dove in like a fish in water. The crack immediately healed, blocking the next person who wanted to enter, leaving them with no choice but to draw their own sword and attack. "What's going on?" Someone who did not know what was going on asked. "I get it now, this is a selection." "Yes, I heard that this is the prelude to every Rising Dragon assembly." Because there are quite a number of Sword of Gojoseon participating, it is impossible to arrange so many matches, so there will be a selection first. As long as one can break through the defenses of the Rising Dragon platform and enter the Rising Dragon platform, they will be truly qualified to participate in the assembly. That's right, swordsmen focus on offense. Only by breaking through the defenses of the Rising Dragon platform and entering the Rising Dragon platform will one be qualified to participate in the assembly. In short, this is the elimination round. Looking at the incense stick in the air, it was burning very quickly. It would probably burn out in less than half an hour. The Sword of Gojoseon had to enter the Rising Dragon arena within half an hour. A Samsung Sword of Gojoseon slashed out and slashed at the Rainbow Raider's power. Not only did it not tear through the protective power, but it also bounced back. This defensive power did not seem to be easy to deal with. The Sword of Gojoseon immediately spread out and attacked from various angles. Some of the Sword of Gojoseon's attacks were stronger, and they were able to break through the defensive barrier with a single strike. Some of the Sword of Gojoseon's attacks were weaker, and they could only attack multiple times. The baby-faced 2-star Sword of Gojoseon only slashed out once. The speed of the sword was extremely fast, and it was extremely sharp. Before the sound could be heard, the defensive barrier was torn apart. Chu Mu's sword also slashed out without any trace of smoke or fire. He cut a hole in the Rainbow Raider's protective power, and his body flashed and he floated in like a wisp of smoke. Not long after, the incense stick burned out and the time was up. The defensive power of the 3 Rising Dragon platforms naturally disappeared, revealing the Sword of Gojoseon standing on the Rising Dragon platform. Below the Rising Dragon platform, there were even more Sword of Gojoseon standing, and each of them looked dejected. They were unable to pass the test within half an hour and were eliminated. You. The old man pointed with his finger. You are all eliminated because you used sword technique. The Sword of Gojoseon, who thought that their close combat sword techniques were very secretive, had their faces turn pale. There was no chance for them to fish in troubled waters. In the end, out of the nearly 2,000 low-grade Sword of Gojoseon, more than 1,600 were eliminated, and only 300 or so entered the real Rising Dragon League. The majority of the mid-grade Sword of Gojoseon were also eliminated, with only 200 or so passing. About 400 high-grade Sword of Gojoseon were also eliminated, with less than 200 passing. This result was really shocking. However, the Sword Kings who were able to pass through the selection, each one of their strength was no small matter. Look, those 2-star Sword of Gojoseon actually passed. Exclamations sounded. Impossible, they must have used sword techniques, cheating. Do you think the experts of the dynasty are idiots? Do you see that? Those are the people who used sword techniques, and they were all eliminated. I don't accept this. Suddenly, one of the eliminated low-grade Sword of Gojoseon shouted, "They are only 2-star Sword of Gojoseon, how could they have the ability to break through the defenses and enter the Rising Dragon arena?" That's right, I don't accept this either. With someone taking the lead, others followed. Immediately, dozens of Samsung Sword of Gojoseon chimed in. I think that the 2-star Sword of Gojoseon definitely did not rely on their own abilities. If you want to prove it, let them fight with us to determine who is better. That's right, prove your strength with real combat. The situation seemed to be a little strange. Chu Mu and the baby-faced Sword of Gojoseon became the focus of attention. Even the true Dragon Emperor's gaze fell on them. You are not my match. Facing the questioning, Chu Mu only said lightly, "This big brother is right, you are not my match either." The baby-faced Sword of Gojoseon smiled brightly. A group of people who can't even enter the Rising Dragon arena is indeed not Brother Chu's match. Elders, don't worry about it. A calm and domineering voice sounded. It was Longzuan. He was the crown prince of the true Dragon Dynasty and the #1 genius in the history of the dynasty. His status was extremely high, and his words carried a lot of weight. Brother Chu, I didn't expect to see you here after we parted at the creation platform. Longzuan looked at Chu Mu, and a cold light flashed across his domineering eyes. Back then, you made me submit to second place. This time, I will use my sword to show you who is first. Anytime. Chu Mu faintly smiled. The others were dumbfounded. They had never thought that this unknown two-star sword of Gojoseon would be acquainted with their crown prince Longzuan. From the crown prince's words, it seemed that they had competed before. Instantly, more people were interested in Chu Mu. The creation platform. I remember now. The creation platform is in the West Tiger territory. A few years ago, our crown prince Longzuan went there before he broke through to the creation realm. I see. It seems that our crown prince Longzuan was second on the creation platform, and the first place was the two-star sword of Gojoseon. That was then, and now is now. The true dragon bloodline will become more and more powerful as one's cultivation increases. Furthermore, the dragon's sovereign crown prince's cultivation is at the third firmament of creation, which is one firmament higher than his opponent. It's obvious who is stronger between the two of them. Chu Mu felt that the true dragon emperor's gaze was focused on him. It immediately brought him great pressure. The gaze was so sharp and deep that it seemed to see through his body. It couldn't be helped. When Longzuan returned from the West Tiger territory, he told the true dragon emperor about what had happened at the creation platform. The true dragon emperor had an impression of Chu Mu's name and was curious about him. Now that he saw Chu Mu in person, he naturally wanted to see what kind of genius could make his son, whom he was so proud of, lose to him. However, no matter how he looked, he couldn't see anything. The Rising Dragon Assembly will continue, the true dragon emperor said. Since he had spoken, the low-level sword of Gojoseon, who were shouting dissatisfaction, naturally didn't dare to say anything. They could only leave dejectedly and become spectators. The three elders were in charge of the Rising Dragon platforms. Participants, please leave the Rising Dragon platform and wait for the start of the competition, the elder said. Chu Mu and the others left the Rising Dragon platform. A transparent seal rose and shrouded the Rising Dragon platform. The seal of the low-level Rising Dragon platform could withstand the attack of the mid-level sword of Gojoseon, while the seal of the mid-level Rising Dragon platform could withstand the attack of the high-level sword of Gojoseon, while the seal of the high-level Rising Dragon platform could withstand the attack of the Nirvana Realm swordsman. There were a total of 363 low-level sword of Gojoseon, and all of them were in the hands of the elder in the air. The elder quickly flipped through the list, preparing to arrange his opponents. Big brother, my name is Fu Chaochin. How should I address you? The baby-faced sword of Gojoseon stood beside Chu Mu and asked. Chu Mu, answered Chu Mu. He felt a strange aura from Fu Chaochin. I'll call you Big Brother Chu. Fu Chaochin seemed inexperienced, but Chu Mu did not underestimate him. He was a two-star sword of Gojoseon, but he could stand out among the many low-level sword of Gojoseon. He deserved to be taken seriously. Moreover, Fu Chaochin looked very young. Chu Mu estimated that he should not be more than 40 years old. A two-star sword of Gojoseon, who was not even 40 years old, had such amazing cultivation talent. It was simply unheard of. Long Zun, for example, was very talented, but he only became a sword of Gojoseon when he was in his 50s. In fact, Chu Mu was very curious about Fu Chaochin. He was curious about his background. Big Brother Chu's cultivation is only at the early stage of the second heavenly layer of creation, but your sword attack is more powerful than the other Samsung sword of Gojoseon. You're amazing, Fu Chaochin said sincerely. You're even more amazing, Chu Mu said sincerely. No, I'm different from Big Brother Chu. Fu Chaochin shook his head. If Big Brother Chu had the same background as me, you would definitely be more powerful. Chu Mu smiled but did not ask about Fu Chaochin's background. Fu Chaochin did not intend to explain his background either. At this time, the old man announced the relevant rules. No secret techniques were allowed, and he read out 2 names. 2 low-level sword of Gojosian flew up and entered the Rising Dragon arena. They were the opponents and were ready to fight to determine the winner. The winner would continue to participate in the Rising Dragon assembly, while the loser would naturally be eliminated and become a spectator. The battle began. Both sides were using Samsung Sword of Gojosian, and they were not ordinary Samsung Sword of Gojosian. Once they attacked, their attacks were shockingly fierce. Whether it was their swordsmanship or the power of their sword techniques, they were not to be underestimated. For a moment it was difficult to determine the winner. After watching for a while, Fu Chaochen pointed at one of the Samsung Sword of Gojosian and said, "I think that person will win. What do you think, Big Brother Chu?" Chu Mu nodded. This was also his judgment. To be able to determine who would win so quickly, Chu Mu was a little surprised by Fu Chaochen's eyesight. Fu Chaochen had shown that he was better than the Samsung Sword of Gojosian in terms of cultivation talent, swordsmanship power, and eyesight. The power of his sword technique must be extraordinary as well. However, it would depend on Fu Chaochen's battle. Chapter 1054. The winner was decided. Sure enough, the Samsung Sword of Gojosian that Fu Chaochen had pointed out won. After that, there were a few more matches. After watching for a while, Fu Chaochen was able to point out who would win. It was the same as what Chu Mu had thought. In the end, he was right. Some of the Samsung Sword of Gojosian next to him took a few more glances. In the 6th match, Fu Chaochen's name was mentioned. It was his turn. Fu Chaochen landed on the Rising Dragon arena with a smile. "Kid, you'd better admit defeat. Otherwise, it won't look good if you get injured." Fu Chaochen's opponent was a tall and burly man with a rough face. He grinned at Fu Chaochen. It couldn't be helped. Fu Chaochen's baby face looked like he was less than 20 years old. It was not surprising that he was called a kid. However, Fu Chaochen seemed to mind being called that. The smile on his face disappeared and he frowned. He looked a little annoyed. Before his opponent could say anything, he unsheathed his sword. The golden sword light was extremely sharp. In the blink of an eye, it streaked across the space of the Rising Dragon arena at a speed that was beyond the human eye's sight. The Samsung Sword of Gojosian's eyes only saw a flash of sharp golden light approaching from afar. It filled his eyes. The world in front of him seemed to have disappeared. Only the golden sword light was rapidly expanding, making him feel that he could not avoid it. The terrifying sharpness attacked him and made his scalp tingle. It was hard to imagine that a mere 2-star Sword of Gojosian could give him such a feeling. What a fast sword! It's concise, direct, and sharp. It's well practiced. The spectators were amazed. Chu Mu was also a little surprised. Fu Chaochen's swordsmanship was indeed very strong. The Samsung Sword of Gojosian quickly held his giant sword in front of him, blocking Fu Chaochen's sharp and swift sword. Just as he was about to swing his sword to counterattack, Fu Chaochen swung his sword again. One sword after another. The golden sword light was like a storm. It gathered into a terrifying force and bombarded the giant sword, making the giant sword tremble and his hand go numb. The last sword strike seemed to have condensed all the power from the previous strike. It was like a falling meteor, incomparably domineering. A ball of golden light rapidly enlarged in his eyes. That power made the Samsung Sword of Gojosian tremble. After striking the greatsword, it paused for a moment before the greatsword shattered the protective sword aura and smashed into Zhao Fu's chest. Even though the terrifying power was weakened by the armor, a portion of it still struck Zhao Fu's chest, causing cracking sounds to ring out. The Samsung Sword of Gojosian was sent flying. His face was pale and he spat out blood. Fu Chaochen, a 2-star Sword of Gojosian, had used his terrifying sword speed and tyrannical attacks to defeat a Samsung Sword of Gojosian without any chance of retaliation. Is this little brat really a 2-star Sword of Gojosian? Too powerful. His bone age is less than 40 years old, and his cultivation is at the late stage of the second heaven of fate realm. His swordsmanship is so powerful, and his actual combat ability is so amazing. Did he come from there? The true Dragon Emperor's gaze fell on Fu Chaochen, and he said thoughtfully, "That kind of aura is indeed very similar. It seems that this little brat must have run out on his own." Fu Chaochen proved his strength to everyone. "Do you think the other two-star sword of Gojoseon could be so powerful?" "I don't think so. This baby-faced sword of Gojoseon is at the late stage of the second heaven of fate realm, while the other one is only at the early stage of the second heaven of fate realm. There is a gap between them." Seeing Fu Chaochen's strength, everyone's eyes focused on Chu Mu again. They were all guessing, but soon they would see it. Because in the 7th round, Chu Mu's name was mentioned. Chu Mu's opponent was a female sword of Gojoseon with a cultivation at the peak of the 3rd heaven of fate realm. Without saying a word, she directly drew her sword. The light blue sword light turned into ripples that spread out and swept over. Suddenly, the surrounding air became as thick as water. She used her sword skill as soon as she attacked, not giving Chu Mu the slightest chance. The blue sword light flickered. Sword after sword, the ripples turned into raging waves that surged and rumbled. The female sword of Gojoseon stood on top of the raging waves, as if she was treading on the waves. The light blue sword in her hand was raised high, and the surging power caused the surrounding air to vibrate. She raised her sword and slashed down. Gold and blue intertwined. It was bleak, like the killing of autumn water. Ripples, raging waves, and the killing of autumn water were 3 sword skills in a row. When combined, their power multiplied, which surprised Chu Mu. "Under my killing of autumn water, you will lose without a doubt." The female sword of Gojoseon's lips curled into a smile. It was a smile of victory. Immediately, the smile froze. Shock, like darkness swallowing the light, occupied her face. Facing her killing of autumn water, Chu Mu faced it head-on. He unsheathed his sword and flicked his wrist. The sword trembled slightly, and a strong power gathered. His body shot out like an arrow from a bow. He faced the killing of autumn water head-on and slashed with his sword. The power was like thunder. The heaven-class top-tier ordinary sword intent, the green-gold sword light, and the high-frequency vibration power gathered into an extremely powerful sword. In an instant, the killing of autumn water was split open. It turned into a green-gold wind blade and attacked the female sword of Gojoseon. His body flew, and the sword pierced into the air again. The Sword Queen's reaction was quick, and she hastily dodged, just in time to meet Chu Mu's stab. Unable to dodge, her protective sword aura was pierced through. Although the terrifying power was partially weakened by the inner armor, there was still a portion that shook her body. Her blood surged and she flew backwards. For a moment she felt powerless. Defeated again. This 2-star sword of Gojoseon is also strong. Chu Mu's strength was shocking. Not bad indeed. The true Dragon Emperor nodded. He was sure of Chu Mu's strength. With his cultivation at the early stage of the second heaven of creation realm, he was considered to be at the lowest level among the 2-star sword kings. However, he was able to withstand the opponent's 3 consecutive sword skills. Not only did he break the opponent's sword skills, but he also forced the opponent to dodge. Especially the sword that stabbed into the air, it was a stroke of genius. Brother Chu is so powerful. Once he attacked, he grasped the opponent's reaction and controlled the rhythm. Fu Chaochen was also very surprised. He is indeed powerful. Only then is he worthy of my battle. The revered dragon said to himself as he stared at Chu Mu. He is indeed capable, but... Lan Haichao shook his head. Haha, if his cultivation reached the 3rd sky of creation, he would be qualified to fight with me. Murong Xiao seemed to be talking to himself, but the surrounding sword of Gojoseon heard him. Lan Haichao and Murong Xiao were implying that Chu Mu was not qualified to fight with them. Li Xiaoxiao and Wang Yu did not say anything. Brother Chu, you are indeed powerful. If you come to our place in the future and gain our recognition, you will become even more powerful, Fu Chaochen said. Fu Chaochen repeatedly mentioned our place, which made Chu Mu even more curious. He could not help but ask, where is your place? The ancient god world. Fu Chaochen transmitted his voice. Looking at Chu Mu's puzzled expression, he suddenly understood. Oh right, you call the ancient god world the ancient battlefield. Ancient battlefield. Chu Mu's pupils shrank. He had heard of these words before. It was said that the headquarters of the Heavenly Sword Hall was located in the ancient battlefield. It was said that there were countless experts in the ancient battlefield. It was said that there were countless opportunities in the ancient battlefield. In short, the ancient battlefield was described as a paradise. Of course, Chu Mu was not a fool. Opportunities and dangers coexisted. As the ancient battlefield that had existed since ancient times, its dangers were not something that could be clearly described with words. From Qin Tiany's words, Chu Mu had some understanding of the ancient battlefield. Because Qin Tiany had gone to the ancient battlefield before, Qin Tiany had also recommended Chu Mu to enter the ancient battlefield to cultivate. It was said that the cultivation environment there was better. Chu Mu planned to make some preparations after the Rising Dragon assembly ended before heading to the ancient battlefield. Because the ancient battlefield was not a place where one could enter as they wished. There was a time limit. Every year one could enter and exit. Chu Mu glanced at Fu Chaochen again. He remembered that Qin Tiany had said that there were two types of swordsmen in the ancient battlefield. The first type were swordsmen that came from the ancient world. The second type were swordsmen that had lived in the ancient battlefield for a very, very long time. According to Qin Tiany, swordsmen from the ancient battlefield could travel between the ancient battlefield and the ancient world. However, swordsmen from the ancient battlefield could not casually leave the ancient battlefield. Otherwise, they would have to pay a corresponding price. The stronger one was, the greater the price. Fu Chaochen came from the ancient battlefield and didn't seem to have any abnormalities. There must be some reason. As for the reason, Chu Mu didn't delve into it. He chatted with Fu Chaochen and understood the situation of the ancient battlefield while watching the battles. There were 363 low-grade Sword of Gojoseon. After the first round of intense battles, a total of 182 people advanced and 181 people were eliminated. Among those who advanced, one of them didn't have an opponent and advanced without a fight. However, advancing now didn't have much use. After all, there was only one champion. Other than the champion, no matter if it was the second or third place, they wouldn't receive any rewards. Therefore, there wasn't much difference between being eliminated in the first round and being eliminated in the last round. The first round of the low-grade Sword of Gojoseon group had ended. The old man was preparing the list for the second round. The mid-grade Sword of Gojoseon group and the high-grade Sword of Gojoseon group had also ended. They were about to enter the second round. Relatively speaking, each of the three groups was worth watching. The low-grade Sword of Gojoseon group had 5 champions and 2 2-star Sword of Gojoseon. They were undoubtedly the most eye-catching. The strength of the 5 champions was really strong. Their opponents didn't even have a chance to draw their swords and were easily defeated by them. Their strength had already surpassed the level of a Samsung Sword of Gojoseon and was comparable to a 4-star Sword of Gojoseon. With their strength, it wouldn't be difficult for them to defeat an ordinary 4-star Sword of Gojoseon. As for Chu Mu and Fu Chaochen, they were eye-catching because their cultivation was the lowest among all the participants. However, their strength wasn't to be underestimated. Although they weren't as domineering as the 5 champions, they were still surprisingly clean. However, Chu Mu knew that they hadn't used their full strength. The battle had just begun. Chapter 1055. The golden-red sword light was like a meteor shower, covering the sky as it fell from the sky. The Samsung Sword of Gojoseon raised his head to look at the sky. Countless golden sword light were reflected in his eyes. It was so sharp that it made him shudder. The golden red sword light contained the power of the law of metal and the law of fire. Both of these powers had reached the peak of heaven class and were perfectly fused together with the explosive sword origin and peak heaven class sword intent. Every sword light was unbelievably powerful. This was Fu Chaochen's sword. He had a baby face and looked harmless to humans and animals, but once he made a move, he was decisive, swift, and fierce, without the slightest bit of carelessness. His opponent was complaining. He had just pulled out his sword when he was faced with Fu Chaochen's fierce and violent attacks. The power of every sword was not something he dared to ignore. At this point, it was already the third round of the competition. The sword of Gojoseon, who could enter the third round, had extraordinary strength. However, under Fu Chaochen's sword, he could only withstand 2 moves before he was defeated in the third move. Is this a swordsman from the ancient battlefield? Chu Mu muttered to himself in a voice that only he could hear. With his eyesight, he could naturally see that Fu Chaochen was not only skilled in swordsmanship, but also had a profound grasp and application of the law powers. Every sword strike was profound. If he wasn't wrong, Fu Chaochen should be an explosive swordsman. The sword technique he cultivated was a kind of sword energy that focused on explosive power. The most important thing was the instantaneous eruption of power. The power would be very tyrannical. To deal with this type of swordsman, one had to either avoid his eruption or block it. When the eruption ended, there would be an opening, and that would be the time to counterattack. But so far, none of Fu Chaochen's 3 opponents could withstand a round of his eruption. This young sword of Gojoseon with a baby face and even a little shyness when he smiled had left a deep impression on everyone. After the first round, the number of people who had advanced to the next round was 182. After the second round, the number of people who had advanced to the next round was 91. Now that the third round was over, the number of people who had advanced to the next round was 46. After Fu Chaochen's match, it was Chu Mu's turn after another 2 matches. This time, Chu Mu's opponent was the sword of Gojoseon, who looked a little old. His cultivation was at the peak of the third heaven of creation realm, but his hair was already white, and his eyes were a little turbid. Unlike Fu Chaochen, Chu Mu rarely took the initiative to attack. The other party attacked with his sword. That sword looked ordinary and unremarkable. The sword pierced through the air. It was simple, but it contained a kind of mystery. Chu Mu's gaze was unconsciously attracted to it. The spectators' gazes were also unconsciously attracted to it. It felt as if their minds were about to be sucked in. With a thought, Chu Mu broke free from this feeling. The sword piercing towards him was very slow, as if it had no power at all. But it gave Chu Mu a feeling that he could not dodge it. No matter how he moved, it was impossible to dodge the sword. When Chu Mu attacked with his sword, he once again had a strange feeling. His sword was also affected by an inexplicable power. It seemed to have become slow in a trance. What power is this? Chu Mu was secretly surprised. The rule of slowness. The true Dragon Emperor and the old man in the sky were first stunned, and then somewhat amazed. The rule of slowness was a rare power, only inferior to the rule of emptiness. It was more mysterious than the rule of Yang, the rule of Yin, and so on. It was very difficult to comprehend it. The moment the rule of slowness was used, the surrounding air and space seemed to be affected. The flow slowed down, making it seem as if everything had slowed down. But that was not the case. It was an illusion. In an instant, the weathered middle-aged man's sword was right in front of Chu Mu, right at his throat. Chu Mu's sword moved. A terrifying vibration power buzzed, making one's scalp tingle. It directly dispersed the air around the sword, making it impossible for any power to get close. With a swing of the sword, absolute power broke apart the middle-aged man's sword. Under the rebound force, the sword shot out like a meteor. After many battles, Chu Mu's control and application of vibration power had deepened. He could use it as he wished, and he could control it as he wished. Chu Mu's sword caused Fu Chaochen's eyes to suddenly light up. It was like a hot knife through butter, unstoppable. At the crucial moment, the rule of slowness once again displayed its wondrous effect. The middle-aged man narrowly avoided Chu Mu's sword. Just as he was about to counterattack, Chu Mu flipped his wrist, and the sword that had pierced to the limit slashed out horizontally. The terrifying earthquake force, sword origin, and sword intent fused with the power of laws, instantly breaking through the middle-aged man's protective sword aura. With a bang, the protective sword aura shattered. Where the sword landed, the robe was torn to shreds, revealing the inner armor. When the sword and the inner armor clashed, a portion of the terrifying power still passed through the inner armor, blasting into the middle-aged man's body, causing him to stagger. His expression changed drastically as he felt his organs being attacked by a powerful force. Before he could react, Chu Mu's second sword struck the same part of the inner armor. After 3 consecutive strikes, the middle-aged man vomited blood and flew to one side, landing heavily on the ground. He had been defeated. It was clean and neat. It was shocking once again. Chu Mu and Fu Chaochen, 2-star sword of Gojoseon, the biggest dark horses. Even if they couldn't make it to the end, they would still be remembered. After all, compared to the other contestants, they were only 2-star sword of Gojoseon. In terms of cultivation base, they were already inferior by a large margin. The gap between them was very obvious. However, they had already passed 3 rounds of the competition. Each opponent was stronger than the previous one, but they were all defeated cleanly by them. Long Zun, Lan Haichao, Murong Xiao, Li Xiaoxiao, Wang Yu, and the others also easily defeated their opponents and successfully advanced. In the 4th round of the competition, there were 46 contestants, fighting for the top 23. According to the competition's elders, they would be arranged according to the strength that each contestant had displayed in each round. The champions wouldn't even fight in advance. Their battles would be held at the end. In the 4th round of the competition, there were 46 low-level sword of Gojoseon. Whether it was Long Zun, Chu Mu, or Fu Chaochen, all of them defeated their opponents cleanly and successfully advanced to the 5th round. At this point, Chu Mu and Fu Chaochen, the 2 sword of Gojoseon with the lowest cultivation base, started to be compared with the 5 champions. Bulsh *T, the 2 of them are not bad, but they are definitely not senior Brotherland's match. The disciples of Starry Sky Sword Sect refuted. That's right, they are also not senior Brother Murong's match. This was what the disciples of Azure Dragon Palace thought. No matter what, the champion will definitely be Long Zun Crown Prince. This was what the people of True Dragon Dynasty said. Similarly, Long Zun Crown Prince, Lan Haichao, Murong Xiao, and the others were also very confident. They believed that the champion would definitely be them. The others were just opponents that they defeated to show off their strength. In the 5th round of the competition, 11 of the 23 low-level sword of Gojoseon would be eliminated, and one of them would advance to the next round. Watch me defeat you! A Samsung sword of Gojoseon roared, unleashing his full strength. Then, he was defeated. He was defeated by Chu Mu's sword. Fu Chaochen still used his tyrannical explosive power, not giving his opponent a chance to counterattack. Compared to his previous opponents, he only lasted for a few breaths of time before he was defeated by Fu Chaochen's tyrannical sword. Along the way, they defeated opponent after opponent and entered the 6th round, advancing to the top 12. Chu Mu and Fu Chaochen's strength was undoubtedly powerful, and they had a group of supporters. Brother Chu, you are indeed very strong. You did not disappoint me. I believe that we will fight very soon. Long Zun walked past Chu Mu, and his voice entered Chu Mu's ears. Then let's see if you can make it to the end. Chu Mu replied. Long Zun's lips curled into a smile as he leaped onto the rising dragon arena. As he drew his sword, a dragon's roar resounded. With a swing of his sword, a terrifying aura turned into a giant dragon's head. It broke through the void and the air became chaotic. It formed a turbulent flow behind the dragon's head, as if it had become a dragon's body. Long Zun's opponent's expression changed. He gripped his sword tightly and slashed out 3 times in a row. The incomparably sharp sword light slashed towards the roaring dragon's head. The dragon's head was incomparably domineering. It crushed the 3 sword light and heavily smashed the opponent's protective sword aura. It hit the opponent's chest, but was blocked by the sword. His right hand held the sword hilt, and his left hand supported the sword. The sword was bent by the dragon's head. The terrifying power wreaked havoc, and the robe around his chest was torn apart, revealing his inner armor. Samsung's sword of Gojoseon roared. He gathered all his strength in his arms, and held onto the longsword with all his might, resisting Long Zun's sword attack. Under the powerful force, his whole body slid back continuously, and his shoes left 2 clear marks on the ground. He slid back dozens of meters before the dragon's power dissipated. However, Samsung's sword of Gojoseon's hands were numb, and his whole body was trembling. He couldn't gather any strength and his legs were shaking. He couldn't even stand properly. He had no choice. He had used all his strength to resist, and it had almost exhausted all his strength. "Can you still fight?" Long Zun was domineering. "I admit defeat." His opponent was also a coward. He had used up all his strength, and his opponent only needed 1 more sword attack to defeat him easily. If he continued, it would be a futile struggle. He might as well admit defeat. Next, Murong Zhao's battle was also a dragon-shaped attack, and it defeated his opponent tyrannically. Many busybodies were hoping for a battle between Long Zun and Murong Zhao. That was because the forms of their sword techniques were both related to dragons, although they looked different. Lan Haichao also defeated his opponent. Li Xiaoxiao and Wang Yu also defeated their opponents, and successfully advanced to the next round. At this point, the 5 champions, as well as the super dark horse Chu Mu and Fu Chaochen, had all defeated their opponents and advanced to the 6th round. Other than the 7 of them, 4 other people had also defeated their opponent. However, compared to the 7 of them, these 4 people had to go through an intense battle before finally defeating their opponent. The last person was very lucky, and advanced to the next round. Chapter 1056. It's finally time. That's right. Next, the 5 champions and 2 super dark horses will fight. I'm really looking forward to it. Although the 2 super dark horses are strong, they're definitely not a match for the 5 champions. I'm more interested in the battle between the 5 champions. That's not necessarily true. These were the supporters of Chu Mu and Fu Chaochen. Those who were eliminated naturally didn't have the right to stand beside the Rising Dragon arena. Only 12 people remained. They lined up in a row and waited for the old man's arrangement. The old man didn't look at the name list. His gaze swept over the 12 people one by one as he slowly pondered. During the waiting time, everyone was guessing who would be the first match of the 6th round. The old man's gaze swept back and forth 3 times as he pondered. Li Xiaoxiao. The first name appeared. Li Xiaoxiao was startled at first, but she immediately leapt and landed on the Rising Dragon arena, waiting for her opponent. Fu Chaochen. The old man slowly said the second name. He's matched up with the 5 champions so soon. It looks like Fu Chaochen will be stopped at the 6th round. Li Xiaoxiao and Fu Chaochen's sword intent are both peak heaven grade, but Li Xiaoxiao's sword intent is an attribute sword intent. It's stronger than ordinary sword intent, and her cultivation is 1 level higher than Fu Chaochen's. Victory is inevitable. I wonder how many moves she'll need to defeat Fu Chaochen. Fu Chaochen turned into a streak of light and landed in front of Li Xiaoxiao. Little brother, do you want big sister to let you have a few moves? Li Xiaoxiao looked at Fu Chaochen's baby face and teased him. Her full breasts trembled along with her body, attracting countless gazes. She was beautiful and her skin was as white as jade. Her hair was like clouds, making her look extremely charming. Her figure was graceful and soft, and she had the demeanor of a big sister. Fu Chaochen's cheeks flushed slightly in the face of Li Xiaoxiao's teasing. He smiled shyly and nodded, sure. Fu Chaochen's answer was truly unexpected. Li Xiaoxiao was slightly startled as well, but she soon smiled. Little brother, you're really dishonest. Although she said that, Li Xiaoxiao wasn't careless at all. She unsheathed her sword like a pool of autumn water illuminating the moon, dazzling everyone. This was the first time in Fu Chaochen's history that his opponent had used more sword attacks than him. When Li Xiaoxiao's sword pierced out, the air seemed to have turned into water ripples. Under the aquatic sword intent, the power of this sword had a very obvious effect on the surrounding air, causing Fu Chaochen to feel restricted. Fu Chaochen belonged to the type of swordsman who possessed explosive power, while Li Xiaoxiao belonged to the type of swordsman who attacked continuously with her sword. Both were unique in their own ways. Like water, it was endless and endless. Sword after sword, it was not as strong as Fu Chaochen's. Instead, it was soft and gentle. The swords were connected to each other, and it was as if they had formed a stream of water that flowed over. The softest thing in the world was water. The golden light was blinding as Fu Chaochen unsheathed his sword. The golden sword light tore through the sky and transformed into a meteor that blasted toward Li Xiaoxiao. However, the meteor sword light, which was full of explosive power, was swept by the layers of ripples. Its speed became slower and slower, and the light on it was rapidly weakened. It was shattered by Li Xiaoxiao's sword. See, I knew it. Fu Chaochen is definitely no match for Senior Sister Li. Senior Sister Li is indeed very powerful. On the contrary, Li Xiaoxiao's eyes flashed with a trace of surprise. Although she had shattered Fu Chaochen's meteor sword light, she could feel the power contained within it. It was not something that a two-star sword of Gojoseon could produce. She immediately concluded that Fu Chaochen's sword art was definitely very profound. Otherwise, the explosive power of his sword origin would not be so strong. Fu Chaochen did not hesitate in the slightest after the sword light was shattered. He attacked again, and in an instant, the sword light that looked like a meteor shower appeared once again. Sword after sword after sword bombarded the void, and terrifying sonic booms formed waves of air that surged outwards. Li Xiaoxiao's expression was solemn. As she moved, layers of ripples spread out, affecting the surrounding air and making it viscous. It also affected Fu Chaochen's sword light, causing its speed to decrease slightly. While dodging, she continuously swung her sword like water. The explosive power was not strong at all, but it had the advantage of having a lot of momentum behind it. After probing for a bit, the two brought out their true strength and fought fiercely. His sword fingers brushed past the blade of the sword, and the sword slashed forward from his chest. The sword glare that was like autumn water was like a line between heaven and earth. It sliced through the air and brought with it endless power as it charged towards Fu Chaochen. The extremely long sword light covered more than half of the rising dragon arena, leaving Fu Chaochen with nowhere to dodge. Fu Chaochen's eyes seemed to be shining with starlight. He swung his sword, and his sword was like a shooting star. The three sword strikes in an instant hit the same point of the sky and water sword technique, breaking it. High in the air, shooting out like a falling meteor. The terrifying sword light rushed over, causing Li Xiaoxiao's hair to flutter. Li Xiaoxiao moved. Her water-like long sword danced in the air. Her posture was graceful, as if she was dancing. Light blue sword chi revolved around her, stacking on top of one another. They transformed into streams that shot through the air, forming an endless stream. Even the air seemed to be driven by them. The area within a radius of several hundred meters seemed to have turned into a swamp. Fu Chaochen, who was falling from the sky, slowed down slightly and was obviously affected. It's Senior Sister Li's aquatic sword dance. It's Fu Chaochen's honor to be defeated by senior sister Li's aquatic sword dance. Exclamations rang out. Li Xiaoxiao, who was under the aquatic sword dance, looked even more beautiful and intoxicating. She was like a fairy dancing in the water. What a strange sword technique. Chu Mu frowned slightly as he thought to himself. The aquatic sword dance directly affected the surrounding environment, creating an environment that was disadvantageous to the opponent. It would weaken the opponent's speed and power, which was equivalent to increasing one's own strength. Suddenly, Li Xiaoxiao's graceful figure spun and slashed out twice. The fine sword light broke through the air, attacking Fu Chaochen from both sides. The aquatic sword will, the rules of metal and the rules of water, caused the power of the two sword lights to reach the extreme. Fu Chaochen's baby face showed an unprecedented serious expression. There was a kind of piety that made his face seem to be covered with a layer of divine light. Heaven and earth were vast. The sword in his hand was raised from bottom to top. A ray of light rushed up from the sword hilt and gathered at the tip of the sword. An invincible and indestructible aura was released, causing the heaven and earth to change color. Break. The voice was vast and powerful, piercing through metal and rocks. Fu Chaochen became one with his sword and turned into a meteor, falling from the sky. Compared to the previous meteor sword light, this meteor was like a firefly compared to the moon. It was earth-shattering and unstoppable. The explosive power increased layer by layer. The environment affected by the aquatic sword dance was destroyed. The terrifying aura directly hit Li Xiaoxiao's body, causing her face to turn pale. The terrifying sword light and terrifying might seem to have shattered a meteorite falling from the sky. The friction between the sword and the air ignited a blazing and powerful golden-red flame. With a loud bang, it seemed to be capable of toppling mountains and overturning seas, destroying the heavens and the earth. The air was heavy and suppressed, causing explosions to spread out. It was as if they were in a vacuum, unable to breathe. The feeling of suffocation was extremely uncomfortable. The terrifying aura was isolated by the rising dragon arena. The people outside could not feel it, but Long Zun and the others looked serious. They could also see that the sword skill that Fu Chaochen had unleashed was very powerful. It was definitely one of the best among the third-grade earth-breaching sword skills of the Earth tier. Li Xiaoxiao used all her strength but couldn't block it. She was hit by the meteor sword light. Her delicate body trembled violently and flew out. Her face was pale and blood flowed out from the corner of her mouth. On the other hand, Fu Chaochen was full of fighting spirit. However, a trace of paleness flashed across his face. It seemed that using this sword skill was still a bit difficult for him. Cough cough. Li Xiaoxiao coughed twice to calm her breathing. She teased again. Little brother, what's the name of your move? Meteor 7 Extinction Swords, third move. Meteor Sky Piercing. Fu Chaochen didn't hide it. Meteor 7 Extinction Swords. Li Xiaoxiao nodded and sheathed her sword. Little brother, you're very strong. I admit defeat. Admit defeat. Fu Chaochen was stunned. Although Li Xiaoxiao seemed to be injured, it seemed that she still had the strength to fight. Moreover, she was one of the 5 candidates to win the championship. She shouldn't admit defeat just like that. Li Xiaoxiao didn't explain anything. Her graceful figure moved and left the rising dragon arena. Many people found it hard to accept such an outcome. One of the 5 candidates to win the championship actually lost. The difference was too big. But no matter what, this battle ended with Fu Chaochen winning and Li Xiaoxiao losing. Li Xiaoxiao was eliminated and Fu Chaochen successfully advanced. It was undeniable that Li Xiaoxiao and Fu Chaochen were very strong. The old man looked at Fu Chaochen deeply and announced the candidates for the second battle. Chu Mu's name was mentioned. His opponent wasn't one of the candidates to win the championship. It was the Samsung Sword of Gojoseon who was lucky to advance. Please enlighten me. The Samsung Sword of Gojoseon cupped his hands and smiled. Immediately, he drew his sword. As soon as he drew his sword, a cross-shaped sword light appeared, which spanned more than 10 meters. Although he was lucky to advance, once he drew his sword, he showed great strength. Compared to the eliminated sword of Gojoseon, he was indeed more powerful. However, for Chumu it was not enough. No matter how powerful he was still at the level of the Samsung sword of Gojoseon. He hadn't really reached the level where he could compete with a 4-star sword of Gojoseon. Only someone who had the strength to easily defeat an ordinary 4-star sword of Gojoseon would attract Chumu's attention. He didn't even use any sword skills. He just integrated 2 types of rule force, activated the earthquake force, and attacked with a mysterious sword technique. He broke the opponent's cross-shaped sword light. With another sword attack, he forced the opponent to be unable to resist and was easily defeated by Chumu. Advance. Next, Long Zun, Lan Haichao, Murong Xiao, and Wang Yu's opponents were the other 4 Samsung sword of Gojoseon. The difference in strength between the 2 sides was obvious. However, they won easily and advanced. Thus, the 6th round ended. Chapter 1057. Low-grade sword of Gojoseon Group, 7th round, top 6. Long Zun, Lan Haichao, Murong Xiao, Wang Yu, Chumu, and Fu Chaochen. One had to admit that as a 2-star sword of Gojoseon, he was able to win all the way to this stage, standing side by side with one of the contenders for the championship. This was completely out of everyone's expectations. At this point, no one dared to underestimate Chumu and Fu Chaochen anymore. Although Chumu had yet to battle with one of the contenders for the championship, the strength he had displayed since the beginning of the battle had won everyone's respect for him. Even if he did battle with one of the contenders for the championship, he wouldn't lose that easily. As for Fu Chaochen, he had defeated one of the contenders for the championship, Li Xiaoxiao, proving his strength to the world. How nice would it be to have 2 2-star sword kings battle it out? Someone said like this, harboring expectations. Since both of them had entered the 7th round, people began to compare Chumu and Fu Chaochen. I think Fu Chaochen will win. I think so too. Of course, based on his performance so far, Chumu was considered inferior to Fu Chaochen, but the truth would only be revealed when the 2 of them battled. First, I have to congratulate all of you for entering the top 6. However, it doesn't matter whether you are in the top 6 or the top 3, because there can only be one champion. The old man's gaze swept over Chumu and the other 6 people, indifferently saying, "The 7th round begins now, Long Zun. Murong Xiao." At this stage, there was no way to avoid it. The old man's announcement stirred up everyone's emotions. Long Zun, the crown prince of the True Dragon dynasty, the number 1 force in the Great Chaos Lands, possessed the bloodline of a true dragon, and had mastered the True Dragon Sword Dao. Although his sword intent was still a common sword intent, it had reached low-level High God realm, and the several types of law forces he had mastered had also reached low-level High God realm. Murong Xiao was the number 1 disciple of the Azure Dragon Palace, the number 1 sect in the Great Eastern Dragon region. He had inherited the Azure Dragon Sword Dao and had already mastered it to the limit. His sword intent had evolved into the Azure Dragon Sword Intent, which was several times stronger than the average Heaven-class sword intent. Moreover, Murong Xiao had been cultivating the Sword of Gojoseon for a longer time than Long Zun. His mastery of the power of laws was also slightly better than Long Zun's. Both of them had their own advantages, and both were related to dragons. Many people had been looking forward to the battle between them for a long time. Finally, it was about to begin. Revered dragon, I've been waiting for this battle for a long time. Murong Xiao stood on the Rising Dragon arena, facing Long Zun directly. He pointed his sword and scabbard at Long Zun. Can't wait to be defeated by this crown prince's sword? Long Zun smiled domineeringly. If you want, I can let you have 3 moves first. Murong Xiao retorted without hesitation. Before they even made a move, the 2 of them were already arguing verbally. powerful auras rose from the two of them. Their auras were piercingly cold and surging like tidal waves, striking the surroundings and causing waves of turbulence. Vaguely, the airflow around Long Zun and Murong Xiao condensed into the shape of a dragon, and the roar of a dragon could be heard. Fight! Raising their auras to the limit, Long Zun and Murong Xiao both burst out at the same time. Their swords were unsheathed, and the airflow around them condensed into their swords. The crowd felt their vision blur, and the two of them seemed to have turned into two dragons, rushing towards each other and engaging in a fierce battle. The golden dragon was majestic and domineering, incomparably sharp. The azure dragon was agile and graceful, swift like the wind. Without dodging, the two dragons collided. Dragon roars reverberated in the air, and the air was torn apart. Countless explosions sounded and layers of airflow were formed. The true dragon sword and the azure dragon sword seemed to be competing to see who was the dragon, the real dragon. This is their true strength. At this time, whether it was Long Zun or Murong Xiao, the aura exuding from their bodies was majestic and domineering, far surpassing the previous battle. Before this, they did not use their true strength because their opponents were too weak to be taken seriously. Now that they had met their match, if they did not use their full strength, they would only be defeated by the other party's sword. The low-level God Realm Ordinary Sword intent was comparable to the top-level Heaven Realm Azure Dragon Sword intent. In just one exchange, the two of them had clashed more than a dozen times. Even with the Rising Dragon Arena's seal, the sound of the two swords colliding was like a sharp dragon's roar, reaching everyone's ears. Fu Chaochen stopped talking to Chu Mu, focusing on the battle. Whether it was Long Zun or Murong Xiao, both were opponents he had to pay attention to, because he might have to face one of them in the next round. He had full confidence in his own strength, but he could not be blindly arrogant. Chu Mu was also watching the battle between Long Zun and Murong Xiao. The true Dragon Dynasty's most outstanding crown prince, the Azure Dragon Palace's new king's disciple, this was a battle between two dragons. If Long Zun's time in the Fortune Realm was similar to Murong Xiao's, Murong Xiao would definitely not be Long Zun's opponent. However, the truth was that Long Zun was younger than Murong Xiao by many years. In terms of Fortune Realm cultivation, Murong Xiao was obviously better than Long Zun. However, Long Zun had the true dragon's bloodline, his physique was strong, and his strength was unparalleled. This was an advantage Murong Xiao did not have. Both of them had high attainments in swordsmanship. As they fought, their figures crossed more than a dozen times, and each time, their swords clashed more than a dozen times. In just a few breaths' time, they had clashed more than 1,000 times. The shock waves from the two swords clashing caused the surrounding air to shatter. That kind of sound was enough to make one's scalp numb and body tremble. It was a dazzling scene. What a fast sword, what a powerful sword! Many Sword of Gojoseon exclaimed in admiration. Even a portion of the mid-level and high-level Sword of Gojoseon who were not participating in the battle looked over. Take this! Return of the Azure Dragon! Murong Xiao roared, and a dragon's roar resounded. He waved his sword, and a sword light swept across half of the Rising Dragon Arena, turning it into a sea. Amidst the dragon's roar, waves surged. Suddenly, a pillar of water shot up into the sky, and a green figure soared into the sky. A majestic roar resounded in the surroundings. A green dragon that was more than 10 meters long swooped down, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. Just a mere azure dragon. Take my true dragon Sky Patrol. Long Zun was not to be outdone. He slashed down with his sword, and the sky behind him was filled with majesty. Countless thunderclouds appeared, and a golden dragon appeared from the thunderclouds. The dragon's roar was earth-shattering. The golden dragon and the azure dragon collided, and an explosion occurred. Long Zun Crown Prince waved his sword again, displaying his sword skill. He turned into a golden dragon, and pierced through the terrifying shock waves of the explosion, like a true dragon coming out of the abyss, and charged towards Murong Xiao. Good timing! Murong Xiao's face darkened. His body spun, and a long sword appeared on his body. Tiny dark green dragon-shaped chi poured out like a storm. Golden light blazed. Golden dragon shatters the sky, true dragon break. All the dark green dragon-shaped chi were shattered, and nothing could stop it. Murong Xiao's face changed slightly, and the sword in his hand danced rapidly. A huge azure dragon head condensed, and a terrifying green shockwave with the speed and sharpness of the wind cut through the air. After the collision, another explosion occurred. Long Zun's body fell straight down, and his feet stomped on the ground. The tyrannical true dragon sword energy and the strength of his muscles gathered, and exploded in an instant. With a boom, the rising dragon arena seemed to shake, and layers of ripples appeared on the ground beneath his feet. His aura was boundless, and his sharpness was unparalleled. Holding the sword with both hands, he slashed upwards, and with the help of his body's rotation, his strength became even more tyrannical. Golden Dragon soars to the sky, 9 profound rising dragon break, an Earth-class 3rd-grade heaven-shocking sword skill. Azure Dragon fall. The azure dragon head didn't dissipate, and Murong Xiao's eyes turned green. His chi became even more condensed, and he gathered all his strength. 3 types of rule energies gathered, and the azure dragon sword energy and sword energy erupted. He slashed downwards, and man and sword became one, transforming into an azure dragon that descended from the sky. Dragons were divine beasts with noble bloodlines. Their strength was even more tyrannical. Although it was just a dragon condensed from the energy of 2 people, and wasn't a real dragon, it still possessed a terrifying might. The 9 profound rising dragon break was also known as the 9 spirals rising dragon break. As the name implied, it revolved 9 times. Every time it revolved, its power would become more condensed. After 9 revolutions, its power would increase by several times. At the same time, the 9 profound rising dragon break also contained 9 types of rule energies. Long Zun had only cultivated it to the point where he could merge 3 types of rule energies. It could also be called 3 profound rising dragon break. Looking at Long Zun's 9 profound rising dragon break, Chu Mu fell into deep thought. Such an attack had opened his eyes, and allowed him to see a new kind of sword skill. In fact, this was the true Dragon Dynasty's sword secret. Sword secret and sword skills were actually similar. They were both formed from sword energy, sword intent, and rule energies. However, sword secret was more profound and more complicated than sword skills. Naturally, its power was also stronger. In fact, Chu Mu's comprehension was indeed shocking. However, in the end, he was still too young. Compared to those sword saints or even the dynasty, it was like comparing a firefly to the moon. There was nothing to compare. There were still too many things he needed to know, learn, and experience. In the past, he thought that his attacks should be like that. But now, after experiencing the Zhen Yuan secret realm, and watching Fu Chaochen, Long Zun, and Murong Xiao's battle, his understanding of swordsmen's battles had undergone a great change. It was a great change, but it needed time to settle down. Chu Mu felt that he had made the right choice in coming here. After seeing Fu Chaochen and Long Zun's battle, he knew that this was his reward. Of course, whether it was the 7 meteor swords or the 9 profound rising dragon break, they were not something that Fu Chaochen and Long Zun could create. They were the foundations of their organizations, the research of countless ancestors, leaving behind a secret sword for future generations to comprehend and cultivate. At this point, although Chu Mu had comprehended something, it was still in a blurry state. Azure Dragon Break was also a move that incorporated 3 types of rule energies. It was one of the Azure Dragon Palace's sword secrets. Because it incorporated the Azure Dragon sword intent, its power was even stronger. The speed of thought was the fastest. As all kinds of thoughts flashed through his mind, Long Zun's 9 profound rising dragon break had already clashed with Murong Zhao's azure dragon break. The azure dragon and true dragon roared and roared, wanting to destroy each other. With a loud boom, it was as if the heavens and earth had exploded. A shock wave that could destroy mountains spread out in an instant. Layers of golden and dark green ripples swept out like waves, crashing onto the rising dragon arena's seal. Creaking sounds could be heard. The seal, which could withstand the full power attack of a mid-tier sword king, rippled under the impact of the collision between the two sword skills. Chapter 1058. True Dragon Sword Secret Art. 9 Profound Rising Dragon Break. Green Dragon Sword Secret Art. Azure Dragon Fall. An earth-shattering explosion shook the entire rising dragon arena, and the seal was about to shatter. The golden dragon and azure dragon were destroyed, and Murong Zhao's body flew up into the air, smashing heavily onto the top of the seal, creating ripples before falling down. Longzhuan's body fell like a meteor, crashing heavily onto the ground, causing countless ripples to explode. The explosion pushed forward like waves, and only dissipated after 10 breaths of time. Who won? Many people were confused. Murong Zhao struggled to get up, but Longzhuan leaped up, his power exploding once again as he charged towards Murong Zhao, slashing with his sword. Murong Zhao's pale face changed, and he hurriedly raised his sword to block, but was hit by Longzhuan's sword, and was sent flying, spitting out blood. In the end, Murong Zhao lost under Longzhuan's attack. Because Longzhuan had the bloodline of the true dragon, his body was stronger, and his recovery speed was faster. This was an advantage that Murong Zhao did not have. Longzhuan advanced, and Murong Zhao was eliminated. Lan Haichao. The old man in the air read out the name of the next battle. Chu Mu, Brother Chu, do your best. Fu Chaochen clenched his fist and said with force, I will win. Chu Mu smiled, and his tone was full of confidence. As a 2-star sword of Gojoseon, it is indeed impressive that you could come all the way here. I have to admit, if your cultivation had reached the 3rd sky of Fortune Realm, I might not be your opponent, but now. Lan Haichao was also full of confidence, and believed that the current Chu Mu was not his opponent. Now, you are still not my opponent. Chu Mu continued Lan Haichao's words. You are very confident, but under my sword, your confidence will be shattered. Lan Haichao was slightly startled and then smiled. No matter how much he said, he could not defeat his opponent. Chu Mu preferred to fight back with the sword in his hand. In the blink of an eye, a cold light flashed, and the long sword was unsheathed, and the sharp qi rushed towards Lan Haichao. Lan Haichao smiled again, and his holy sword left the scabbard. A sword light akin to starlight pierced through the air, piercing through the air, piercing a small tunnel, heading straight for Chu Mu. Chu Mu only felt the piercing sharpness of the starlight, even his protective sword of Gojoseon was unable to block. A starlight sword of stars. Lan Haichao. Unless Chu Mu expose his starlight sword of stars sword intent, he would have to use the immortal sword of Gojosephan Lan Haichao's match. Unless Chu Mu to Huang, if he wanted to fight Lan Huang's sword, he would need to use Immortal God's sword. After weighing the pros and cons, Chu Mu immediately made the decision to use Undying Sword intent. Like gliding on water, the soles of his feet slid across the ground, causing the starry sky sword ray to miss. Chu Mu's sword shot out, leaving a streak of light in the air. Like a meteor, it shot towards Lan Haichao. Immortal Sword intent was condensed within, causing the meteor-like sword ray to have a feeling of immortality. It's also an elemental sword intent. The true Dragon Emperor, the Elder in the Sky, Long Zun, and the other contestants were all stunned. They remembered that the sword essence Chu Mu had used in the previous battle was ordinary sword essence, not elemental sword essence. Could it be that Chu Mu actually had the ability to hide the attribute of his sword intent? Speaking of which, this could be considered an amazing ability. Lan Haichao was also very surprised. He had his own elemental sword intent, and he could also feel Chu Mu's elemental sword intent. He sheathed his sword and began to circulate it. Amidst the sounds of breaking air, sword lights fell from the sky like meteors, piercing towards Chu Mu. Dense sword lights covered the surroundings, very bright and very dazzling, interfering with Chu Mu's vision. Then, Lan Haichao's eyes widened, as if there were starlight streaking across his pupils. The sword in his hand burst out with astonishing starlight, shooting out one after another. As he waved his sword, it was like a group of meteors, bombarding. An incomparably tyrannical aura bombarded Chu Mu's body first. Before the meteor could hit Chu Mu, it exploded first. Countless sword lights, sharp and unparalleled, pierced through the surrounding void, tearing apart Chu Mu's protective sword aura, as if to turn Chu Mu's body into a hornet's nest. In the blink of an eye, Chu Mu hastily waved his sword and quickly dodged. Ray after ray of incomparably sharp starry sky sword glows were all hit by Chu Mu's sword, deflected or shattered. Lan Haichao also did not expect that Chu Mu would use this method to resolve his star explosion sword technique. However, the star explosion sword technique was only the weakest sword technique that he had mastered. The starry sky sword technique was performed again. The rules of wind and the rules of speed were combined, causing the speed of the sword to reach the extreme, exceeding Chu Mu's vision. Even with the power of divine will, he could only vaguely capture a trace of the sword's trajectory. The sword had already broken through the newly formed protective sword aura, piercing towards Chu Mu's throat. It was too fast, beyond his vision. A strong sense of crisis swept over him, and he could only rely on his instincts that had been tempered by countless life-and-death situations to react. At the same time, he slashed out with his sword, tearing the void apart, forcing Lan Haichao to dodge. With a shake of his sword, he performed the star explosion sword technique again, causing countless sword lights to explode. Sword technique against sword technique, Chu Mu and Lan Haichao fought fiercely and were evenly matched. This two-star sword of Gojoseon is also very strong. It seems that he is not inferior to Lan Haichao. Humph, senior brother Lan has not shown his full strength yet. Little did they know that the more they fought, the more surprised Lan Haichao became. When the two swords clashed, he could often judge the opponent's strength. Lan Haichao felt that Chu Mu's sword essence was not inferior to his own in terms of purity, and even seemed to be superior to his. Was this possible? The sword essence of the early second heaven of creation was not inferior to the sword essence of the peak third heaven of creation, and even showed signs of surpassing it. The cultivation method that Lan Haichao practiced was the most powerful technique of the starry sky sword of Gojoseon. The sword essence that he cultivated was much purer than the sword essence of the peak Samsung sword of Gojoseon. It was very close to the sword essence of an ordinary 4-star sword of Gojoseon. There was only one possibility. Chu Mu's sword principle cultivation method was more profound than Lan Haichao's. The two swords clashed again, and Lan Haichao's expression changed again. He felt a strong vibration that hit his sword, numbing his hand. For a moment, he could not gather his strength and immediately retreated. It seems that I can't defeat him with normal means, Lan Haichao said to himself. He had to use his full strength. Boundless starry sky. With a shout, the sword in Lan Haichao's hand once again shot out countless starlight beams. They pierced through the surroundings and circled around his body, gathering in the air above his head. Then, like a cannonball, they shot into the sky and exploded dozens of meters in the air. The starlight exploded and turned into a curtain of stars that fell down, covering an area of a few hundred meters. Within the curtain of stars, countless starlights swam like tadpoles. Chu Mu felt that under the curtain of stars, there seemed to be a special force that was suppressing him. On the other hand, Lan Haichao's aura seemed to have become fiercer and more vigorous. Secret of the starry sky sword, boundless starry sky. Compared to a swordsman like Lan Haichao, Chu Mu's fighting methods were still lacking. At this moment, he deeply realized this point. Lan Haichao shouted and pointed his sword at Chu Mu. Suddenly, several starlight beams separated from the curtain of stars and shot towards Chu Mu. However, they did not attack Chu Mu. Instead, they wrapped around Chu Mu's body. Chu Mu felt his body become heavy, as if he was tied up by a rope. His movement speed was greatly reduced. Lan Haichao's body was also surrounded by a few rays of starlight. The starlight assisted him, making him even faster. He waved his sword, and his sword's speed increased by 30%. His sword pierced through the void like a thunderstorm, stabbing towards Chu Mu's weak points. Chu Mu counterattacked with his sword. Because of the starlight, his sword's speed was significantly reduced. His muscles shook, and a terrifying power burst out from his body, causing the surrounding air to ripple. Several starlight beams were also shattered under the shock of the power. Chu Mu's sword speed quickly recovered. Fall. Lan Haichao waved his sword with one hand and guided with the other. More starlight separated from the curtain of stars and shot towards Chu Mu. With a thought, Chu Mu drew his sword with his left hand. A saint's sword and a sword light shot out of the space ring. Under his control, it gathered the power of the rules of wind and shot towards Lan Haichao, restraining him. The sword in his left hand and the sword in his right hand combined. The two swords danced, shattering the incoming starlight beams. Sword manipulation technique. Dual sword manipulation technique. The true Dragon Emperor, the old man, and the other swordsmen were all stunned. So you're a disciple of the Flying Heaven Pavilion of the West Tiger Territory. The starlight beams shattered. Lan Haichao was entangled by Chu Mu's sword manipulation technique, and could not attack Chu Mu with the starlight beams. The boundless starry sky gave Chu Mu a feeling that it was similar to the sword domain. Of course, he had personally experienced the power of the sword domain, and he knew that the boundless starry sky's power was far inferior to the sword domain. Even so, the boundless starry sky still gave Chu Mu a lot of trouble. Seeing that the starlight could not get close to Chu Mu at all, and that he was attacked by the sword manipulation technique, he could not escape for a while. He could not defeat Chu Mu at all. Lan Haichao thought quickly. Starlight swords. Lan Haichao used another technique. In an instant, the starlight in the curtain of stars in the sky quickly gathered, condensing into starlight longswords. A total of 3 starlight longswords floated above Chu Mu's head, releasing an astonishing sharpness. They locked onto Chu Mu, making Chu Mu's scalp tingle. Then, under the control of Lan Haichao, the 3 starlight longswords flew down. As a peerless genius, Lan Haichao also had the ability to multitask. The starlight longswords looked like 3, but they were actually 1 and could not be separated. With a slash of his sword, Lan Haichao broke apart the defensive sword technique's sword beam. Wrapped in starlight, Lan Haichao's speed was extremely fast as it charged towards Chu Mu. Together with the 3 starlight longswords, it launched an attack towards Chu Mu. The 3 starlight longswords had the same effect as the defensive sword technique. In the face of Lan Haichao's attack, Chu Mu was in a predicament. The 2 swords danced rapidly, one slash after another, turning into countless sharp sword light, twining around Chu Mu's body. The sword in his right hand was tyrannical and domineering, while the sword in his left hand was tricky and strange.